I'm going to call this meeting to order. If you will rise with me, Pledge of Allegiance. Didn't have to be reminded today. I'm back. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, good morning. You know, when you get used to following an agenda, if it's not written there, you just keep going. And so I appreciate those that have kept me straight over the last couple meetings. Before we go into our first item today, I wanted to talk a little bit about some work we've done over the last couple weeks as it related to the tragic situation up in Baltimore with the Key Bridge, and some work we've done in transportation in that regard. I just wanted to, I'm just going to do it now instead of waiting until the end of the meeting. And so, as you know, that was a catastrophic situation in Baltimore when the ship hit the bridge and it tumbled into the water, and a host of folks lost their lives there. Turned out it was workers on the bridge. Thankfully, Maryland was able to stop additional traffic from going on the bridge, and thankfully it was, 2 o'clock in the morning or so there wasn't a lot out there anyway. And so it could have been a lot more horrific in terms of casualties and so forth, and thankfully it wasn't, but it's still people's lives were lost, and there's a tremendous amount of damage. I would tell you that I was engaged before 6 o'clock that morning on that issue. I happened to pick up and look at my phone at about 5:40, and one of my friends had sent me a text that said, "Glad you're not in Baltimore. I'm sure you're glad you're not in Baltimore." And I'm like, what? It was 5:30 in the morning. And so I looked and immediately saw what had happened and reached out to my counterpart in Maryland. The governor reached out to the governor. I got in touch with the governor, reached out to Maryland's governor, and offered whatever assistance we could provide, and then we got the heck out of the way because they had work to do. Commissioner did the same thing. He and I were in conversation that morning. He reached out to his counterpart up there. So everybody in transportation just jumped in to see what we could do. So 10 days ago or so, we briefed the governor and some local officials at the Port of Hampton Roads on a couple things. One was how that incident will impact us in terms of traffic and container traffic and truck traffic and road traffic, et cetera, in the immediate term. And then sort of how do we stack up? What do we look like in terms of vulnerability? What's our risk assessment? Could this happen to us? Et cetera, et cetera. And so we spent about an hour and a half briefing the governor, the attorney general, some Congress folks, the chairman of the Finance Committee in the Senate, other local leaders, some other senators, some other delegates. And basically we told them a couple things. First, that this is basically a temporary situation for us in Virginia, meaning the impact of the bridge collapsing and closing the channel and thus the harbor will be short-lived. And I think right now what they're saying is June 1. The Army Corps has set out a date of June 1 is when they expect that channel to be, the main channel, to be reopened. They've already opened a couple smaller channels to deal with some traffic and to facilitate the folks that are working on the bridge. But they've set a date that they believe they can have it open, which would be by June 1. And so pretty much after that, I would expect, or we expect, operations at their port to continue, or to go back to where it was and continue on like it was, which will remove the excess capacity, at least over a fairly short period of time, that has come to the Port of Virginia. The Port of Maryland is strongly a big percentage of their work is roll-on, roll-off kind of work, meaning big pieces of industrial equipment and automobiles. They're the largest ro-ro port in the country. and they service a tremendous amount of autos and big pieces of construction and farm equipment. Norfolk and Portsmouth and Newport News, the ports, the terminals down there, are not well equipped for that. We have some capacity, particularly at Newport News and a little bit at Portsmouth, but we're just not set up to do it. We don't have the longshoremen that do that kind of work. We don't have the processing facilities to process cars, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of that business, we get some of that business, but a lot of that business will go to other places, all the way down to Jacksonville and up to up into the Northeast, into the even above New York. We will get, and have gotten, and did that day, a fair amount of increased container traffic. And so virtually every ship that goes to Baltimore with containers on it is also stopping at the Port of Virginia, either on the way in or the way out. And so the trick became, how do you get those containers off? And, you know, they load them in a certain way to take them off in a certain way. And so when you mess with the schedule, it messes things up a bit. But our folks did a great job and weighed in, and we have been servicing those ships and those shippers since that date. We've signed up about 500 new truck drivers at the facility in Portsmouth. Portsmouth is our most efficient container facility at VIG. We call it Virginia International Gateway. And that facility is a reservation-based system facility, which helps us as well. So people just don't show up when they want. They take a reservation and they show up and we're ready for them. And so that helps us meter those additional vehicles in and out. I said that we have signed up about 500 new truckers, Maryland truckers. We have had the same surge and actually greater surge back in 2021 during the pandemic and the supply chain disruption and all that. We had a bigger surge then and had more traffic through our ports then than we expect today and throughout this period until June and July. And so the conclusion that the port CEO, Stephen Edwards, and our Commissioner, Steve Britch, gave to us was, we can handle this, we got it. There's lots of things that are being done behind the scenes to facilitate that. And obviously, we now have the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel is more torn up than it's ever been. And so in terms of the construction disruption there, so that's a little bit of a concern. But as I told you, most of this traffic will be going into the port in Portsmouth, into the Virginia International Gateway Port. And so most of those trucks will likely use Monitor Merrimack, 460, 58. They won't be coming around again to Norfolk and going across HRBT. So it's a short, we think it's a short situation that we're going to experience. Again, ameliorating itself sometime in June. And we're just doing everything that we can to make sure that that we help those folks get through this process. I think they're doing a good job of that. You know, how long the bridge will take to build, that's beyond what we know, but it's certainly going to be a fair amount of time. And what kind of bridge they come back with, you know, and who pays for it, and all those things. It's still being negotiated and figured out. But from our perspective, the most important thing is that we get the shipping channel open and get their port back working, because they're losing about $10 million every day, and people aren't getting paid that work there. So it's really important that we get. Commissioner, I don't know if you want to add anything into that. Then we pivoted to, of course, okay, so what happens when it happens to us? And so we went through a briefing on that as well. We talked about our 21,000 bridges in Virginia. We talked about our 600 or so that are in poor condition. And I want to remind y'all what that means in our lexicon. And when I first joined this board, we used the federal phrases when it got to poor as structurally deficient, which the first time I heard that, it made the hair stand on the back of my neck, because structurally deficient to me does not mean the same thing it meant to them. And structurally deficient means the structure was deficient and it might fall down. That's what it meant to me. That's not what it means, nor does poor mean that. But in any case, we do have bridges that are in poor condition in Virginia. Of the 21,000, as I said, There's about 5% of that that's in poor condition. Those bridges are in the 6-year plan in some cases, and otherwise are being addressed through maintenance plans. Functionally, all those bridges will get touched in the next 6 years. And along with that, as you remember, we've just had some legislation that went through to change the way our policy works in terms of some cuss bridges, so that we can get to those earlier than we've gotten to them in the past. That legislation was passed and signed. So now, instead of waiting for bridges to get to poor condition to fix them, we can fix them when the leak starts, not when the leak gets big and the floor's rotted. We can wait, we can get started earlier with that money. There's other sources of funds that we could do that with before, but that's an important source of funds. So in any case, we have all these bridges in Virginia. We showed them sort of pictures of what condition bridges looked like and sort of where we were. But most importantly, or obviously, maybe something that garners more of your attention are the big bridges. And so as we discussed, obviously in Hampton Roads, if you're familiar with that, we don't have bridges that go across our harbors. We have bridge tunnels. And so we have the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel, which Mr. Stantz, the chairman of. That's a separate authority, but those are 2 tunnels there and a bridge as well, or elevated bridge, a high-rise bridge, along with the bridge, the regular bridges that connect those tunnels. And they were built like that for a reason, and the reason is because we didn't want bridges collapsing potentially and disrupting our harbor and our channel. And we probably were more focused on that because of the presence of the U.S. Navy, because they weren't going to allow us to do it anyway. And so that bridge tunnel was built back in the 60s and replaced the ferry, and it's worked great since then. As you come through that bridge tunnel system into Hampton Roads, the Baltimore ships turn right and go up the bay, and our ships come straight and come deeper into the roads. And then you have another bridge tunnel, the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, similar to the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel. Again, tunnels, not bridges over the channels. And so you come through there, and then you get to the naval base. And you're either going to go up to the James River and up to the Newport News Port or to the Richmond Port, or you're going to make a left at the naval base and go down the southern branch, the eastern branch and the southern branches, and go to the main facilities we have there, the NIT, the VIG, Portsmouth, and then Norfolk Southern has their coal piers there. And then further down, there's a bunch of shipyards, including the Norfolk Naval Shipyard in Portsmouth. So we have aircraft carriers and cruise ships and everything else. The reason I bring up sort of that piece in the Navy is that we were very concerned that once we got past there, could a ship get loose? Could something happen? And again, the Navy has some standards that we follow in the port, so that when we come by Navy ships, we actually have tether tugs on all these big ships, these big ones. And the tether tugs are meant to be able to slow these ships down. They create an incredible amount of, I can't remember exactly what the technical term is, but basically it's disruption of the water as they come by. And even at slow speeds, it's a fair amount of disruption. And so that rocks these ships in their berths. And so we want to slow them down. So all these big ships get tether tugs and other tugs as needed and as required by the pilots who are in charge of that pilotage in the harbor. And so we don't have these big bridges that go across our channels coming into the harbor, but then we do have a few, right? So if you keep coming up the James River, you've got the James River Bridge. That's a structure where a bridge goes across the harbor, across the channel. And as you go further up, you got the Benjamin Harrison Bridge, same situation. And in fact, the Benjamin Harrison Bridge was knocked down in 1977, and the channel was closed for an extended period of time. And so those 2 bridges are still vulnerable to this kind of thing, right? Going up the bay, as I talked about before on the way to Baltimore, we have 2 rivers. You have the York River first and the Rappahannock River second. Both of them have bridges that transit from one peninsula to the other out there on the eastern end. The first in the York River is the Coleman Bridge. The Coleman Bridge is particularly important because when you go under it, you get to the Naval Weapons Station. And so the Navy sends a bunch of ships up the bay into the York to go to the Naval Weapons Station, but they have to transit that Coleman River Bridge channel. And so if something were to happen to the Coleman River Bridge, that would disrupt not only the traveling public there, which is about an hour to go around, but it would also impact the U.S. Navy. And so it's something that we are thoughtful about. I will tell you that in general, Navy ships have more than one engine, and in general, they are maintained to a very high standard, and their crew are very high standards, and that's not to disparage anybody in the civilian world, but they are. And so we just don't have the same risk profile with that as you'd have in this kind of situation in Baltimore. As you go up to the York River, similar situation, you got another, what we call fracture critical bridges. And if you hit that with an ocean-going ship, that thing would come down. It would come down to the Coleman. If you hit it hard, if you hit it at 8 or 10 knots with a ship of 1,100 feet and the mass that brings, it's going to knock that thing down. But we don't have ships like that there, and they don't run like that there. And so there is some risk, but the risk is much more minimal, and the disruption would be much less if it happened here. There's lots of work that we're doing on bridge and fender systems and dolphins and so forth. Some of that's in the works, some of that's already done. The Norris Bridge is intended to be replaced in the next 10 or 12 years, if not sooner. And so there's all sorts of things that are in the works to beef up our systems, if you will. But in general, we don't have the same risk profile that they had in Baltimore. I mentioned fracture critical bridges. If you saw the video, which was horrific to watch, but the last piece of the bridge, it's burned in to my memory, to my mind. It was sitting there perfectly okay, right? And then it just went like that. And the reason is because the piece that was holding it down went like that. And the point is, all those rely on each other in a fracture critical bridge. The way they're designed and built is the pieces work together to be a unit. And if you take out one, the others can't stand. That's a fracture critical bridges, and we have those, as I've indicated. We don't have a lot of them, and we're not going to build any more of them. But we have some of them, and they're just designed that way. And as you know, when that bridge collapsed, the concrete bridges going up to it are just sitting there, right? Because they're not part of that fracture critical design. They stand each on their own, and that's what you have at the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel and the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel. If you had one of our ships coming in there, run into the bridge, it would bust up the bridge and knock it out. But it wouldn't take the whole thing down. It'd knock out a section, right? And it can absolutely do that if it could get enough speed outside the channel to do so. And so the point is, even if you have a situation, and we've had those before. Actually, early on, they had some strikes on the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel, and we actually ferried people back and forth in helicopters and all sorts of things to deal with that at the time. So they're all vulnerable, but the level of vulnerability is very different, and we just don't have the same situation that they have in Baltimore. And so we provided that briefing to the governor and a bunch of officials down in Portsmouth. We then provided the same briefing to the House and any House members that wanted to attend virtually, and we did the same thing for the Senate. So we had 3 briefings in the last 10 days. I think what came out of that, from my perspective, was that they came away understanding that we're well prepared. We have a very professional organization at VDOT and a very professional organization at the Port of Virginia, and they both gave us great confidence that we understand what we need to do. We're doing what we need to do. Our vulnerability is very different, and that we're reacting as we need to when stuff happens. We also had a briefing, and part of that by the gentleman at the port who heads their maritime incident response team, and that's the team that comes to work when something happens. And so a great briefing about all the folks that they're aligned with, interagency folks, and sort of how they do what they do. The one thing that came out of this presentation that the commissioner was clear about was we're in great shape in terms of where we are with physical assets. The ones that need to be repaired and replaced are in the plan to do so, and that our policies and procedures are good except for one thing. we don't have a good policy or procedure, an SOP, for what happened in Baltimore when the pilot was aware that he had lost control of the ship, that he didn't have control of the ship, or she didn't. I'm not sure if it was a he or she. But the pilot didn't have control of the ship, and they called and warned the bridge, basically, is that what's been reported. They had maybe a minute and a half, 2-minute warning that they thought they were going to hit the bridge and there was nothing they could do. And so it was that effort that really saved a bunch of people, because they were able to stop the traffic on the bridge. They weren't able to get the folks off that were on there, but they were able to stop traffic, and as I indicated, it was so early in the morning, there wasn't a ton of it anyway. But that changed the day. We don't have an operating procedure for that. We're going to have one really soon, and the commissioner's working on that now. But other than that, we felt that we were in really good shape, and I think our legislators, because of the work they've done over the years to invest in both VDOT and the port and so forth, we've got a couple first-class organizations that are working on this, and we're. I just want to bring you up to date. It was obviously something that's been going on in the news, and we engaged with the legislature to discuss that. Mr. Stanton.
Yes, sir. I'd just like to note that yesterday was the 60th anniversary of the opening of the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel. So it opened on April the 15th in 60 years ago. And I might also add that the anchor incident is over, and our TBM is heading north at a good pace.
His tunnel boring machine, his TBM. That's fantastic. Yeah, it's, I remember well, Mr. Stamp, sitting in line in dark 30 in the morning to make sure you got on the ferry that was going over Kiptopeak. And because if you missed it, it was a bit of a wait. So I did that for a few years before they got the tunnel open, and it was just an amazing feat. How fast they did it, how well they did it, it's just functionally amazing. And there's actually a great documentary out there on it that plays on. I was up one night late, and this documentary came on. It was the building of the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel. It's really pretty cool. Does anybody else have any questions? Mr. Coleman.
Are the cruise ships still going up to Yorktown? And
No, sir.
Is that another vulnerability perhaps for the Coleman Bridge?
The planned Princess cruise ships are not going to Yorktown yet. They do have some smaller ships that come in, but they don't transit the bridge. And so that's not a situation. I don't know if that will occur or not. Princess indicated a couple months ago that they would run that run out of Norfolk, not out of Yorktown. That may come back at a later date, I don't know. But no, it's not scheduled. What is scheduled, and obviously we don't deal with this specifically ourselves at the CTB nor the port, because the port is a terminal operator. The Coast Guard owns the water, right? The Coast Guard and the pilots keep us safe in the water, and we operate terminals. But Norfolk is expected or is planned for in 2025, or is it 6, Wayne? I'm getting my years confused. But in any case, they're going to have a weekly ship call to Norfolk. And so every week there will be a cruise ship in there, every week of the year, which is a dramatic increase. Dramatic. I mean, we get 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 or something, but to have one every week is dramatic. So you're going to see a lot more going by down the River, Wayne, but not up to York County. They'll be in Norfolk.
It's more of a comment than anything else. Is a compliment to you and your leadership and that of the port, because quick action took place. I mean, the terminal is extended its operating hours in order to move containers in and out, to get things moving, and that's just typical of Norfolk. Norfolk is different, in my estimation, than any place on the East Coast in terms of its cooperation and figuring out things really quickly. So compliments to you and your staff.
Mr. Coleman, you know this, and the great thing we talk about in transportation is, we talk about how long things take, right? We talk about how much stuff costs. But the long thing, the impact of how long things take is that many people get involved in a groundbreaking, and many people get involved in a ribbon cutting, but usually it's not the same people, right? And so, and many people get to sort of be a part of something that's really neat, but they didn't really create the whole thing, right? Or they started creating it and then they're gone. And so what I would tell you is what I was trying to suggest earlier is that the quality that we've had at VDOT and the quality that we've had at the port over the recent history has just been outstanding. You know, we've just got good people that work really hard and they're really good at what they do. So, Mr. Britch, you don't have to get all big-headed here, but it's true. It's just true. We have a professional organization. That doesn't mean we don't make mistakes. That doesn't mean we do everything perfectly. We don't. But they are run by good folks that are smart, that work really hard, and are really good at what they do. And I can't really take credit for that. I just get to enjoy it. So thank you, Mr. Commissioner, and thanks to our port CEO, Stephen Edwards, and Bill Burkett, who's his director for the Maritime Incident Response team, and just everybody that's involved there. It's really a pleasure to work with folks that are good at what they do and care and work hard at it every day. So we're the envy, folks. Virginia's the envy. You know, the port is excellently run, and VDOT, people look to VDOT across the country all the time to figure out how to do things better and what are they doing. And that's just what we've been for a number of years. And so kudos to those who've invested in it, to the legislature and previous administrations. And we're lucky to have such a quality group of folks being able to do this. So thank you, sir. Ms. Davis.
Secretary, just a general comment about the increase in truck traffic on I-64 coming in to get freight out of the port. New drivers, I know we've got the gap widening project taking place. I'm sure it's a lot of construction down 64. I just want to make sure and that it's more of an operational matter, and I'm sure you guys have addressed it, but want to keep those new drivers to our Virginia highways safe and those workers safe as they are doing the good work for the Commonwealth. And I'd heard as many as 500 additional trucks per day. So, you know, just hope everybody stays safe and that we're maybe doing some things to increase visibility and get that awareness out. We got new drivers on the road. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Davis, part of our briefing back to the governor, the House, and the Senate reflected on those 500 trucks. And when you take this over a 12-hour period, that equates to about 60 trucks an hour. The reservation system that the port has meters those additional trucks into and out of the port. And as the Secretary has indicated, back in 2021, we saw a much broader impact of freight movement through the port and then back onto Virginia's highways. So simply put, I think what we'll see is some impacts in and around the Hampton Roads area through the water crossings themselves during the peak periods. But the metering of those trucks over a 12-hour day, and what came out this morning was that, in fact, the port was extending its gate hours to now 3 a.m. rather than the 5 a.m. So it's shifting it back. So it gives a broader array to be able to absorb that increase in truck traffic through the network. There's additional capacity on 64 that can accommodate those vehicles, and as they traverse northward onto 95 and points north and west from here, the capacity of the roadway system is sufficient to be able to carry that additional traffic.
Yeah, we worked hard on that. The port also helped facilitate, and my office was involved in establishing a drop lot up in north of Richmond. So you've got some Baltimore truckers bringing stuff and meeting Virginia truckers, if you will, and dropping and picking up. So we're doing everything we need to do, and I think things are moving smoothly. I will tell you, anecdotally, the truckers really like our port in Portsmouth. They really like it. It's quick, it's efficient. You set up a reservation, you're in, you're out, and you're on your way. So we'll see what that means over time, but it's a well-run operation there. Anyone else? All right, thank you very much. The first item on our published agenda is the Economic Development Access Program in Botetourt County. Mr. Russ Dudley. Good morning, sir. Welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Secretary, members of the board. So this morning, I'm going to start you off with a request for economic development access funding from Botetourt County for a speculative site at the Botetourt Center at Greenfield. So I believe most of you have seen these requests before, but I'm going to give you a little reminder of what the program is and what it provides. The program provides allocations for new or improved road access to eligible economic development sites. Localities are required to bring a certain level of capital investment in return for the allocations that you will provide. Projects can be for a known entity, or a facility, you know the corporation that's coming in, or it can be speculative, we call it bonded, site. And we do require some sort of financial surety to cover the allocation in case the capital investment is not produced. The Local Assistance Division does work very closely with the Virginia Economic Development Program when evaluating these requests, and I'll show you our score sheet here at the end. The request today is for a speculative site, and this slide provides a little more detail on that. The locality, as I said, must provide a surety to cover the provided allocations and has 5 years from the date of the allocation to meet the capital investment requirements. The maximum we provide per project is $850,000, and that's with $150,000 being matched. And the capital investment is for this site will be 5 times the allocation. We do have provisions for lower surety requirements for economically distressed communities. However, Botetourt is not an economically distressed community as defined by VEDP. Botetourt Center at Greenfield is a county-owned economic development site. It's located in Botetourt County. In case you're not familiar with the area, here's your location map out there just northwest of Roanoke. The economic development site has been very successful in the past, attracting businesses, and there are 5 existing companies with existing or future operations at the center in Greenfield. Currently, they employ approximately 1,500 employees at the site. There are approximately 450 acres remaining at Greenfield for business development. The proposed access road will extend an existing road to serve a 121-acre parcel in the development site. The county is proposing a 2-lane road approximately 1,100 feet long to access the new parcel. The total estimated cost of the project is just under $1 million, and the county has requested an allocation of $833,646. So there you see the $700,000 will provide unmatched, $133,000 where it will be matched by the county. The Salem District staff has reviewed and concurred with the project estimate. These illustrations just provide a little more information on the proposed project. The access project, as I mentioned, will extend International Parkway a bit to get to Parcel 3 is what they call it, right past Munters and Eldors Corporation. The site has achieved what we call a Tier 3 readiness status under VEDP's Virginia Business Readiness Site Program. And if you're not familiar with the program, it's based on tiers of 1 to 5, with 1 being raw land, nothing really ready to go, and Tier 5 is pad ready to go. This is Tier 3, as I mentioned. Once they get utilities there, it'll be a Tier 4. So it's pretty ready to go. We do work with VEDP to score these sites before we bring them to your for your vote. We use 5 criteria. So the first criteria is the expected total capital investment, which of course here is 5 times the amount that we're going to allocate. Then we look at the site's potential for investment and the expected or potential full-time job creation. Those 2 numbers come from VEDP. We look at the need for the access road. Does it have a road? Is there no road, et cetera? And then we look at the locality's level of economic distress. This project scored very well with a total score of 80 out of 100. Projects must score 50 before we bring them to you for a vote. So easy as that. The next steps will be we'll bring a resolution for the allocation to you next month, And once done, we will enter into a state aid agreement, and Botetourt County will administer this project. Have any questions?
Anyone have any questions? All right, thank you, Mr. Dudley.
Fantastic, thanks.
Next item on the agenda is rail industrial access applications. Mr. Mike Todd, good morning, sir. Welcome. Hope you're well.
Thank you. I will, on that point, apologize in advance. 'Tis the season for allergies, and mine are enthusiastic today, so I apologize if I clear my throat one too many times, but thank you for
We had
having
a
me.
really good thunderstorm last night to try to wash all that stuff away. My car was not green this morning. It was nice.
I was hoping it would give me some relief, but
Luck, sir.
yeah.
You'll get through it.
So I am here to present actually 3 projects that we received applications for the Rail Industrial Access Program. So I'll start off with the 3 site locations, kind of dive into the details of each one of the applications, leave you with essentially the scoring matrix for each one of the projects and our recommendation. And so we have the 3 projects, as I mentioned, kind of in the 3 corners of the state. We have one in Accomack County, down in Hampton Roads in the city of Norfolk, and then also in the city of Stanton. So starting in Accomack County with Sharp Tech. Sharp Tech is an existing company that is expanding. Essentially what they do is handle and process high-quality grade glycols. So those are used in things like antifreeze and different solvents and things like that. So they will be importing the raw material by rail and then also exporting some of the finished product as well. And so essentially this is a track rehabilitation project. So there's an inoperable siding that serves the site that needs to be rehabilitated. The total investment on site is $700,000 with a request of $450,000. And so here's a look just at the site. You can see kind of a stack of the glycol holding tanks and the main office of the facility and the just over 2,000 feet of siding rehabilitation that will take place. And so just to kind of get a quick look at some of the benefits of the project, so we're talking about 101 new carloads, which is about 340 trucks diverted, 2 new jobs in an existing economic development area, and essentially the private investment is 36% of the overall investment, 64% from the state, and it receives a score of 52. I'll have the details of the scoring on a later slide. So, Stanton, we have Queen City Logistics Center. And so this is essentially, Queen City Logistics is essentially the property owner that is applying on behalf of Pilot. And so they are essentially building a diesel exhaust fluid blending facility. And so what they will be doing is bringing in the raw materials via rail to blend, blend on site, and then they will be distributing them to local gas stations in the Stanton area. And so they will be going out by trucks because there are, essentially diverse locations that aren't served by rail. And so this project is 360 feet of new track, a little over 1,000 feet of track rehab. The total request is just over $300,000, and the total investment on site is nearly $3 million. So here's a look at that site, the 360 feet of new track in green, and then the rehabilitation of over 1,000 feet there in red. And so essentially the rail comes, right up behind the facility, which makes it really easy to transfer essentially the diesel right into their processing tanks. Again, looking at the benefits, over 300 new carloads, which equates to over 1,000 trucks diverted. And just one new job, in this case it'll be for the handling of the transload of the fuel. It is an existing economic development area, and it's essentially the funding split is is about 90% private investments, only 10% of public funds, and this also scores a 52. Moving to Norfolk, we have Norfolk Terminal, which is just as kind of a reminder to link to investments in the past. Norfolk Terminal is essentially a subsidiary of Catanoan. They have a big investment that occurred last year in 2023. The governor made an announcement about their expansion on nearly $60 million. And so this is essentially I guess you could call it basically a phase 2 of the expansion of rail on that same site. And so they essentially, what they do is they bring in containers of plastic. They, hold, store, and containerize them on site, and then they move those exports to the port where they get loaded and go overseas. The project is over 1,500 feet of new track. The request is $560,000. So this is actually the first project that we've had that exceeds the 450. Last month we voted on increasing the project maximum to 750. So although it doesn't reach 750, it still is above that 450 previous cap. And the total investment is nearly $60 million on site. Here's a look at the facility, so you can see basically the pad that is being expanded and the new track that will be servicing the new warehouse that's being constructed. And finally, so this is obviously with such a huge investment, this has really big numbers in terms of new car loads being about 3,000, which equates to over 10,000 trucks diverted, and 76 new jobs. Also, because of the large investment, it's essentially 99% private investment, and it receives a score of 69 points. And so this is a look just basically at all three projects kind of stacked up here for comparison. These are the different categories that we score for each application that we receive. So first we look at the number of car loads that are expected, number of new jobs created. We also look at a breakdown of essentially the public portion of the investment, both the total investment for the site and then also the investment in rail specifically. We look at the local unemployment rate. We determine whether or not it's an existing economic development area and whether or not it's served by a short line railroad. And so because all three of these projects exceed the 50-point threshold for our recommendation, we would recommend all three and would bring the resolution of approval next month and then execute the grants if approved.
Mr. Secretary?
Ma'am, Ms. Hines?
Mike, thanks for walking us through. It's interesting to see three in the same presentation. That I don't think that's happened very often. But so the one thing that isn't showing up in our scoring that I know Mr. Kasperwitz has been on for a while is two of these projects, it's coming in and it's going out by rail. And I think that's something that is desirable for the Commonwealth. And so it'd be nice to just see where it is going both directions by rail, that being reflected in the score, or at least in what we look at as the sum up. Because I just think that's really important to balancing out what's going on rail over time. So, but thanks for a great presentation.
Thank you.
Mr. Tott, go ahead. Dr. Smoot.
Mr. Secretary, Mike, we have had several discussions in here about the conversion of the Eastern Shore Railroad to a trails project. I assume this must be close to the end of the line.
Yes, this is up in the northern section, which obviously has operable rail operated by Delmarva Central. They had existing customers at the time of the discontinuance of the rest of the track, and so then this is essentially expanding an existing customer or an existing business along that line.
Thank you.
Mr. Coleman?
It's more of a statement than anything, is that these are really, really good projects. And return on investment is just tremendous. Mr. Stanton and I interviewed or saw the facility in South Norfolk, and they took a shuttered Ford truck assembly plant and turned it into a money-making, something that's good for the locality, for tax base, and also they're going to increase their production by 80%. And they're already exporting thousands of containers a month, and it was a very broad number. I asked the guy, I said, how many containers a month do you ship out of the Port of Hampton Roads? He said thousands. So they're going to increase that number. And I know because of my experience that the repositioning empty containers is one of the biggest line expenses for a steamship carrier. And this is an export, so they're taking empties that would have to be repositioned without cargo in them, and they're moving them to Europe and to Asia. So it's a big deal. And, not only should we be approving these, as Mary said, there's 3, which I don't think we've had before, but I think that increase in the cap, but we ought to be marketing this, because I think that attracts more business to the Commonwealth, is what we need more of as captive audiences, I term, for the Port of Hampton Roads. This is a really big deal. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Todd, when we do the carload scoring, does that reflect, that reflects in theory, the diverted trucks?
You scoring for the application itself?
Yes, sir.
Not technically. I mean, we essentially give points for the number of carloads that are being promised in the application. So the more carloads they are expecting, the more points they can get in the scoring system. When we run a benefit cost analysis, that's when we use the number of carloads to equate to trucks diverted so that we can monetize those benefits. So it's not explicit in the scoring, but we do use the trucks diverted from the
The more
carloads.
carloads in the number, the higher the resultant benefit cost analysis.
Yes.
Right, so there is a direct linkage between one to the other. If one goes up, the other is going to get better.
Sure, yeah, I understand what you're saying, yes.
And so my point, to Ms. Hines's point, is when you have that going both ways, you got more carloads, and you get more cost benefit, and. So that is somewhat taken into consideration, Ms. Hines, if you're moving in and out.
That's true.
Because that's implicit in part of the scoring.
Thanks, Mr. Secretary. I just think it's for those of us who are not so savvy to just be able to see in and out would be helpful.
Mr. Secretary, if I could. We track these projects in great detail over a 15-year period. And so we track to make sure that they fulfill that carload commitment over the whole period of time that our investment is held in a contingent interest. So we monitor that very carefully, and it does, while we focus on carloads and trains and things that affect scoring, there's a direct correlation between carloads and trucks that come off of Virginia's highways, which is why we make these investments. And to Mr. Coleman's point, our rail team, working with our communications team, did do some marketing for the first time of our rail programs over the past couple of months to do just what you indicated, Mr. Coleman, is to say what a great resource we have in Virginia's railroads and in the programs that we have to support how we connect Virginia business to those rail assets.
All right, thank you all. Ms. Green?
Yes, Mr. Secretary, Mike, it was a great report. I love the matrix that you did. It would be helpful to also indicate the maximum scores on each one so that you could readily see how they scored against the maximum. The other thing I was going to say is the amount of private investment versus what they've requested is remarkable, knowing that they could have requested more in each of these 3 cases, if I'm understanding this correctly. Or is it a formula that determined that?
Yes, so we do, even though the project maximum has increased, we do require at least a 30% match on the railroad construction itself. And so sometimes when the railroad construction itself isn't a high cost, in order for them to contribute that minimum 30%, essentially the amount that we are able to award decreases as well. So that was the case in these is, although the total investment in the facility is much higher, the actual rail construction costs were a little bit lower. You're welcome. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Todd. Appreciate
Thank you
it.
very much.
Next item on your agenda is agenda number 3, the draft fiscal year 2025 CTF and VDOT budgets. Ms. Laura Farmer, good morning. Welcome. I hope you're well.
Good morning, Mr. Secretary. Good morning, members of the board. No problem. This morning, I'm going to provide an update from the presentation we provided in January. It's sort of, when I talk about the Commonwealth Transportation Fund, it sets the stage for those who come after me from DRPT, as well as Ms. Pryor, who will come to talk about the 6-year program as a whole. And so my focus today is really on changes that you saw since January, reminding you of what those were and where we are and what to look forward to between now and June. So what the updates are, the potential actions or inactions of the General Assembly and where we stand going into reconvene session and some assumptions that we can make, as well as VDOT has some internal revenue estimates that we use that were not critical to the updates, but they were made before the program was developed, like local revenues or other miscellaneous revenues that don't fall within this purview. And then just generally project participation that falls out of the 6-year program where we hear from our regional partners or localities that those are the updates. That's generally what I'll talk about today. The 6-year window totals $54.4 billion over the period. This includes $789 million for Route 58 and I-81 financing over the period. We're transferring about $5.8 billion to the 3 regions, and $838 million that's dedicated to WMATA capital. The dedicated fuel tax revenue on I-81 is $577 million over the period. We anticipate dedicating $16.4 billion for maintenance and operations. That includes both VDOT and localities, and $17.1 billion for construction, with about $3.3 billion of that coming from others. This slide is just a reminder of what I showed you in January that showed the governor's tax policy proposal on digital goods reflected in his dedication to TPOF and I-81. That was not in the conference report, and its a return is not in the governor's proposal. So back in, because it doesn't have a major impact on the program, we were able to remove that from the assumptions. So this table reflects just the removal of that tax policy change from our programming perspective. That's the major change that we've made related to the General Assembly actions to date. Other updates that we've made since January is just a feedback from the development. That's a ground-up process in terms of money that comes from others and how it impacts the program. So that's reflected in our draft set of numbers today. We also updated our toll facility revenue assumptions with 64 express lanes segment 2 coming online and its full implementation in 2025 as well. Our information gets better and better as time passes, and so that's a facility that has been updated in this picture. In terms of federal revenue, we updated our federal assumptions based on fiscal year 2024 supplementary tables. So that usually takes FHWA a couple of months to get those out, and they came out after we met in January. In total, it's just a $0.8 million change over the 6-year period, but there are some shifts among categories based on the information we were given. There were some population changes from fiscal year 23 that have made some impact on our MPO funding. In addition, we also received an allocation of Appalachian Development Highway System funding of $21.4 million. Our strategy with accepting those dollars is continuing to put it on the Corridor Q project. What that does is free up funding from the whole Route 58 program, and we were able to divert those resources back to the Route 58 program for that future development. And in terms of the regional transportation funds, what I didn't note in January, it has become clear to me, is that the governor's tax policy also had implications for our regional partners because of the increase in sales tax. And so those have been removed from the information I'm presenting to you today. So they'll be reflected as a change. Slide 6 shows our federal revenue detail, just to give you some perspective about how we assume the federal programs will continue over the 6-year period. So the first row is our formula federal funding. 25 and 26 are the 2 years left under IIJA's 5-year period. And so we're using support information that we have based on each year as Congress passes a budget, and details are provided to us. Each year thereafter, across programs, we're growing those programs at 2%. And so we assume that Congress will continue to fund transportation in these core programs, and those are the results totaling about $8.5 billion over the period. The details below are programs that do not fall within the programmatic distribution of federal funding, and they're isolated and uniquely treated. I'll highlight the Bridge Rehab and Replacement Program and the Electric Vehicle Program. Those are both funded out of general fund transfers from the federal government, and so we have not assumed that those programs will continue after 2026, and will continue to monitor the situation at the congressional level to see how Congress will address continuing transportation funding. So this is a standard slide on the revenue picture for the Commonwealth Transportation Fund over the period. I've gone through some highlights of how each one of those numbers have changed over the period. I think the only one I failed to mention was I-81. We've programmed a little bit more debt in 2027 to fully maximize the authorization for the program. This slide provides just a reminder of some information we shared in January. We knew that our paving funding for the program likely needed some additional resources to meet the contracts advertised, to meet our performance targets, as well as fund the commitments that were out there. So we provided a one-time allocation of $120 million in 2025, and provided a corresponding share to localities of 27.7. And noted that we were continuing to monitor our contract awards through this period. The other pieces of the program is we grow our base maintenance program by CPI as an inflationary impact to the program, and ensure that we're funding our maintenance program and efforts completely. And that amount was 2.3% average over the period. For construction program, revenue sharing returned back to $100 million annually. You may remember me talking about a COVID-related strategy of using revenue sharing, getting through that period, and then repaying it over time. The year that we're currently in, fiscal year 2024, was the last year of that repayment. And so the program, as well as the local share that we budget for, drops out of the 6-year picture. The Innovative and Technology Transportation Fund for high priority projects is funded at $25 million annually. And we also fund unpaved roads off of the district grant program at $25 million. So since January, just a couple items of note. We completed a refunding in March and closed on that transaction. We have a present value savings over the entire period of those outstanding bonds of about $31 million. You'll be getting a memo through the secretary on that transaction and how the savings were generated. But the period between now and 2030 has saved us some PTF funding that is used to cover CPR bonds debt service. We use that as well as the assumptions to make sure we can meet our commitments to transforming rail in Virginia and the PTF that it's assuming. And so the debt service over the period has a slight downward change since January. In terms of other agencies and transfers, we reflect any changes that happen in the budget bill and how they affect transportation funding, and those have been implemented. In maintenance and operations, we corrected the base from which the program grew in 2024, and that change has been made. In administration and other programs, we had to annualize the state pay raise that was effective in December and its impact over the period. In terms of transit and rail, so with the draft program, we get feedback on how much mostly CMAQ funding, but some RSTP funding that is being administered by DRPT or agencies affiliated with DRPT, and they get reflected in the 6-year program that you see. In January, all those funds would have been reflected in construction, and so that is a change under transit and rail. And as I mentioned before, for priority transportation funding allocations, we meet the expectations of transforming rail in Virginia that were set, and PTF is able to sustain the funding that was assumed 2 years ago in the draft that we worked on, based on the availability of PTF funding as well as the refunding that we just went through for the CPR bonds. In terms of total construction, by removing the governor's tax policy, there's no longer an allocation directly for TPOF and I-81 from that proposal. As I mentioned before, the CMAQ funding for VDOT would be decreased because of the administration of projects with DRPT. And then we have participation updates from other entities that impact the 6-year program. And then the regional funds, as I mentioned, reflect the removal of the tax policy. And this slide, summarizing the allocations, those numbers that have changed are in green, and they represent the changes that I described previously. So this slide just provides a single-year view of this Commonwealth Transportation Fund budget. The total proposed budget is $9.7 billion. It represents a decrease of just under a percentage point from the current year's budget. And then the pie graph just demonstrates the shares of what make that up. This slide represents the allocation distribution with VDOT and local maintenance payments. They represent about 28% of the total budget, construction at 39%, and rail and public transportation at 9%. This graphic is here to serve as a reminder of the process we go through and the allocation steps as provided by the Code of Virginia. And it's provided here to serve as a reminder about the HMO deficit, which is that orange diamond shaped at the bottom of the yellow column for Transportation Trust Fund distribution. That indicates that any HMO deficit that is needed to be funded by the highway construction share comes in at that point. And so when the needs of all the other HMOF program areas are considered exceed the revenue available, a transfer is required from the construction fund. And that is assumed in the VDOT budget that you see today. This slide describes just the VDOT budget as a whole. It totals $7.8 billion for a grand total of $8.6 billion when you include the regional funds. As I noted in the previous slide, the anticipated crossover today it represents a deficit of $679 million. That is filled with $283 million of federal funds that we put to use in our maintenance program, as well as $396 million of state funding to be transferred from the construction fund. This slide provides a view of just where we've been the last couple of years related to crossover. There are several items that still may impact fiscal year 2025 that is proposed. We will come back to you with those recommendations in June for the final budget. But today we went from 645 in the current year to 680. But what I would note is that 2025, over the 6-year period, represents the highest need to take care of that deficit. So $680 million does not represent a trend. The remaining 5 years average a total deficit of $560. What I would add is that we keep addressing paving 1 year at a time, and we'll continue to look at that to see how best to handle it going forward. This slide just provides a view of all of those updates that I made and how they shape the VDOT program adjustments and their allocation in the current year compared to the proposed allocation in 2025. In terms of next steps, obviously with reconvened session, there are a couple items that impact the department as well as the CTF. Both the General Assembly and the governor has proposed state salary increases for state agencies. VDOT has to implement that and fund it within the dedicated transportation resources. So we will likely be implementing a 3% raise for this summer, and there's a proposed 3% raise next summer. This has been an extensive source of required funding over the last couple years as we're keeping up with labor changes as well as the General Assembly actions. And so it puts a lot of pressure on our resources. The general fund is also being called upon in the proposed budget to provide $70 million for I-81 and also for toll relief on Elizabeth River crossings. If those go forward in a final budget, you will see me come back with those items in June. And then the proposed budget that came out of the conference report changes an annual proposed transfer to the Transportation Partnership Opportunity Fund. When I came to you in January, it was $50 million a year for 4 years for a total of $200 million. The conference report recommended $15 million a year to not exceed $90 million over the 6-year period. And so the governor's amendments did not change that or propose anything different. And so we will be making that change for the final set of numbers. We'll also be continuing to work with the commissioner and the secretary's office in determining any potential adjustment for paving commitments. We're continuing to review that in comparison to the base budget to ensuring that we come up with the right recommendation for funding going forward. We'll also be incorporating federal earmarks into the program. When you see Mrs. Pryor's presentation in a little bit, at least for the highway share, you will see a list of proposed earmarks that we'll be incorporating into the final. There are some significant ones there, including a $42 million earmark for I-81 coming from Congressional Representative Klein. And so we'll be making those changes going forward. So with all that in mind, between now and June, we hit the road with you all for 6-year program hearings, but we also work on these adjustments that are needed for the final recommendations that we'll present to you in June. I know there was a lot and fast, so I'll be happy to take any questions.
Mr. Secretary,
Dr. Smoot.
we have discussed many times 4 major rail improvement programs, those being the Long Bridge project, the Richmond 2 Long Bridge improvements, the extension of passenger rail to the New River Valley, and the Petersburg toward Raleigh potential line. I assume, but I would like to hear it from someone who really knows, that the funding, to the extent there is funding for those projects, is in the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority line in this budget.
Dr. Smoot, why don't we wait till we get to the DRPT presentation and then let Director DeBrule speak to that. She's the chairman of that board. Does that work?
I actually think Laura needs to address it because some of the money goes directly from VDOT to VPRA and some funding goes through DRPT and is reflected in our program. So I think it's most appropriate to answer now.
All right, go ahead.
Sure. So, yes, sir. So the Commonwealth Transportation Fund has a share dedicated directly to rail. We provide that funding to DRPT, and they make the determination on the piece that still stays with DRPT and then what goes to passenger rail. Second, VDOT administers the Priority Transportation Fund. There's a significant investment in the total funding package of PTF funding. And so we ensure that we're meeting the expectations of the original plan, as I mentioned. And then third, there's a major financing component on I-66 inside the Beltway. There are future financing related to that project. The available bonds is in its infancy right now. So VPRA is using estimates with a haircut after COVID. And as they need those resources, we are beginning that work right now, running traffic and revenue on what we can support, having outreach with our funding partners to make sure that we'll be able to meet the expectations. Those bonds that are coming in a couple of years are not incorporated here until that information is a little more firm. They are in VPRA's assumptions that they come to you with, and so that it just needs a little more time to develop. And you will definitely hear a briefing from me and VPRA when the time comes. Those are the three big areas that are encapsulated in the Commonwealth Transportation Fund that support the rail plan.
Mr. Secretary, if I might,
Burrell.
Executive Director Stadler addressed this board in February and went over VPRA's capital budget. And I'll just remind everybody that less than 30% of VPRA's capital budget comes through the Commonwealth Transportation Fund, that they have a number of other sources that come to them through Amtrak and other grants and awards that have gone directly to VPRA. So it is a relatively small portion of their overall budget that does come through the CTF. But that was presented to you in February, and then this body approved that capital program last month. And then the final budget will go to the VPRA board for approval in June.
Mr. Secretary?
Science.
I want to make sure that we're really clear about the maintenance transfer what's going to happen between construction and maintenance, and why do we do that? Just for the benefit of all of our new folks, why are we taking money out of construction and moving it to maintenance?
Sure. Ms. Hines, crossover is something that has happened since 2002. It changes based on revenue performance as well as the growth in the program. And so we have a base maintenance program that is required to grow. We take we present to you a recommendation on the growth rate related to CPI. And then the requirement in the Code of Virginia is that we take our base maintenance and we grow our city street payment expectations by the same base amount, by the same growth rate. And so both of those programs move up incrementally. And what we face is, even though there are infusions of transportation funding in 2013 and in 2020, and after the 2020 action, crossover went the opposite direction because the resources were too much and it was able to come back. That's only happened once. Otherwise, the budget generally exceeds the revenue that's been provided. So the 51% that gets distributed to the Highway Maintenance and Operating Fund is insufficient to cover the needs of the program.
And we have an underlying philosophy in the state of Virginia that says we do maintenance first. We take care of what we have already before we build new. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Okay. So then I have a question for the commissioner, to Mr. Secretary, if I may.
Ms. Hines.
We've spent a lot of time in the last number of years sort of establishing our goals and our standards relative to all of our maintenance areas. And as we do crossover and we, try to make sure we have enough for maintenance, the question I always have is, are we confident that as we do this transfer, we're going to have enough money to deal with paving and bridge repair and all of these things that are part of maintenance and meet our standards? So I'm looking to you to answer that.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Hines, what I'd say is that as we've gone through this scenario, and as Ms. Farmer's indicated, we're going to need to come back to the board and reevaluate the paving contracts that have been issued for this year and reevaluate whether we're going to need some additional surplus funds to be able to be moved from construction to maintenance to be able to meet our targets. Having said that, between pavements and bridges are our largest two assets that we maintain on an annual basis. And we're going to need to take a look at what we're able to pave on an annual basis, what we're able to perform to be able to meet our targets. And maybe it will take us longer to meet our targets that we've adopted in late 2019, early 2020. So those are the conversations that I'm having with staff now to be able to meet those targets that have been put into place. As Ms. Farmer has said, we have experienced a great deal of pressure that has been put onto the maintenance program, either through inflationary effects and/or pay raises that we've experienced over the years through the General Assembly actions. And when we have say 60 to 70% of our staff through the administrative and maintenance budgets those raises being applied, and we're only growing the maintenance program by 2.5%, let's just use round numbers for today, there is an effect that we will likely see an increase demand to the maintenance program and coming in out of the construction program. Mr. Secretary, I think you have a desire to be able to bring before the board in September a presentation on the financial outlooks moving forward and what we see. So I would venture to say that there's a lot more work this summer to be able to put a fiscal perspective together for the board later this fall.
Can you go to slide 15, please? All right, so that's the slide that's in your handout. What it doesn't say at the top is on the left where the orange is. That's our maintenance line, right? And that's 51%. And on the right is the yellow, and that's 49% of a number that's atop of that. And the number that's atop of that is the Commonwealth Transportation Fund minus about $160 million that comes off the top. 80 which goes to special structures and 80 which goes to 58 in Northern Virginia. And so you take the gross amount of money that comes in the top, you take the 160 plus out, and then you divide it 51 to 49, and it just goes through the waterfall like you see it, right? And so Ms. Hines' question basically says, okay, when you do that and you fund the orange stuff, is it enough? And what we're seeing in our budget is it's not enough. So you go down to the bottom of the orange line and you see the orange diamond, thank you. You see the orange diamond, and that's the crossover. That says the number that's needed in the orange column isn't big enough, right? The 49% doesn't get it done. And so what's behind the curtain is our goals and our targets and sort of where we are with those as it relates to maintenance. And we set those goals and targets here, right? And we set them, we haven't achieved them all, we're moving towards them, but we set those targets and goals here, and our insistence needs to be that we meet those targets. Or we decide we have different targets, whatever they are. And so to Ms. Hines' point, we're struggling with that. We've struggled over a fair amount of time. And basically at some point you'd say, well, maybe the percentage isn't right. And what's happening is maintenance continues to rise. As your system gets bigger, there's more maintenance, of course. So as you fund more construction, there's more maintenance. But the cost of maintenance has gone up substantially, particularly in pavements. And you've noted as you've come to these meetings, the last 5, 6, 7, 8 meetings, I get to have fun with Mr. Coker when we get to bids, because so many of our pavement bids are out of our range, right? Because asphalt is getting more expensive to lay. It just is. And so we have all these cost issues. But at the end of the day, that's the juggle that we have. And Ms. Hines is absolutely accurate, and I'm committed to it, that maintenance comes first. Of course, when you drive around our roads, you don't see a pristine 100% everywhere, right? It's not, nor can you afford that. But what we try to make sure is we set good targets and we meet those targets, Ms. Hines. And so we continue to work towards that. The commissioner loves it when I drive up and down the road because I call him about things and tell him about places. And it's, and you know the great part? Things happen when I do that. It's really fun.
I should give you my little list.
Yes, ma'am, you should. Yes, ma'am. But it's a struggle. It's a struggle. And, you know, when we do things which are appropriate, I'm not saying they're not appropriate, but these raises that come in here, right? The employee raises that come in at 3%, another 3%, all of a sudden that number starts getting pretty big, right? And it has got to be funded out of the same pot. So there's lots of pressures. I'm not suggesting it's not appropriate, because I think it was, but it's a competing pot of expenses. And so we'll continue to struggle with that. And the good news is we basically have been in a time where there's been more money at the top than we've seen in historically, and we're not where we were 10 years ago. Thank goodness.
Mr. Secretary, could I just add one point again in the interest of new colleagues sort of having some context? The other pressure that you didn't mention, Mr. Secretary, but that I think is very real, is from all three of our regional authorities. Over the next period of years, we are going to see significant expansions of networks, significant increases in lane miles. And the authorities, by the way they're constructed or authorized by the General Assembly, do not play in maintenance. So everything moves over to VDOT once it's constructed, and the lane miles grow. But this fund does not necessarily grow in the same manner. And that's an emerging problem. I mean, the construction has been slow.
So let me dig in on that, because
Sure.
that's a great point. What I did say was our system's getting bigger, right? But to Ms. Hines's point, the system, the regular part of the system gets bigger out of the CTF pot, right? And you get 51% going to maintenance, and the rest goes to the Transportation Trust Fund, and you can see what happens to that, right? And ultimately, there's some construction that comes out of that, but we chip off pieces for rail, and we chip off pieces for the port, for space, et cetera, DMV. So that all sort of stays there in its own place, right? It's all within one bucket. And if you do more construction, you can't do but so much because you only have but so much money. So now we go out and we create these regional authorities, right? And they raise a tremendous amount of money. And 100% of their money goes to construction, not 51% going down to construction, which construction doesn't end up being 51%, but 100% of their money goes to construction. And that puts all these new lane miles with no maintenance funding source other than the regular pot, which didn't fund their construction or didn't fund most of their construction. And so you got this situation where you're creating a sort of a super construction situation, and there's not a regular stream of money to come behind it to maintain. It's a very good point.
And I think, again, for context, at least in Nova and Hampton, the authorities were stood up at a time when there wasn't money. And keeping it in the region was how we got money. And now we're 10 years, a little bit more than 10 years past the creation of the authorities. And I think a fundamental question is, in the long run, is dedicating 100% of it to construction where we need to be for the next 10 years, or do we need to be someplace different? And that's a General Assembly question, but the rubber's going to hit the road, no pun intended, at this table when maintenance just really begins to eat into the other kinds of construction, eats into how much money is available for smart scale, begins to challenge some of our other programs. So
In 10 years.
that's
right?
my guess. That's my guess.
In 10 years, you're going to really start to see the impact.
And you don't want to get there,
course
right?
not.
So we need to think about it ahead of time.
100%. Great point. Ms. Sellers?
I wouldn't just stop with the authorities, because as land use discussions happen, I don't think at the local level, when you get the VDOT communication on land use decisions, it discusses construction or maintenance concerns. And I'd have to go back and think of all my time on the board of supervisors and as a planning commissioner, and those conversations of maintenance. And I can remember my colleagues actually saying, well, maintenance is VDOT's problem, and very flagrantly saying that's VDOT's problem, and never concerning themselves with that, and actually creating this situation. And maybe the General Assembly should be brought into the discussion, because we talk about proffers on the construction side, and we do talk to the General Assembly from a local level about the maintenance of schools and other facilities, and how you have to think about that as you budget for them, and how you can't use proffers and some of these other things long-term, and how it's very one-sided. So maybe there is a discussion there to be had. The other thing that struck me, coming from a local side, where local governments outside of a city council scenario, where the legislature and the executive branch are one, is you have where the General Assembly is approving pay raises and not giving the money to support pay raises. That's very interesting to me. Again, coming from a local level where you have that discussion, and you have to take that, and it's one budget process where you have to think about that. So that's a very interesting dynamic here in the state.
The pay raises are paid for in general funded places, general funded secretariats, and we're not generally general funded. But at the end of the day, if the top number doesn't grow, no matter where you are, and you raise one line item of expense, then something else has got to give, right? And so 100%. And so as long as the top line is growing to us like everybody else's, if you will, then we should be able to absorb that. But everybody has that same sort of, struggle. Because anytime you grow any expense category, if the top line doesn't change, it's got to come from somewhere.
That in the past, the legislature gives you a bucket of money and you spend it, right? And so it just gives a different context to that, and coming from the local level where, again, you do the processes together. And you have to think, if I'm going to give a 3% pay raise, how am I going to pay for this? I'm either going to cut a program or I have to raise a tax. And it's a very different dynamic between the state and local government that is very interesting.
Mr. Merrill.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Ms. Farmer, as always, an excellent presentation. I just had 2 questions. On your slide 7, you showed the difference between the last 6-year forecast and the current 6-year forecast, and 2 things jumped out was the local and regional project decrease in revenue, and also the decrease in I-81 financing. Could you comment on those, especially the I-81, given that I-81 plan had been developed, how it went down $200 million, as well as the first one? And then I have a second question about federal funds.
Okay. So I'll take, at the top of the slide for local and regional project revenue, there are 2 things happening. A year of construction of the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel falls out of the 6-year window. So it's happening right now, and so it falls out. And then second, the revenue sharing strategy that allowed for additional state money to be provided through fiscal year 2024. We programmed the local share equal to the state share each year at the 6-year financial plan level. Whether those funds are coming in or not, we want to demonstrate that locals are making investments into transportation. And so it's that local share that drops off in 2024 from that revenue sharing strategy, and so by design. And so those are the 2 big things that are changing local and regional revenue from 24 to 25. And then there are some minor adjustments going forward with the incorporation of the express lanes and funding from others, as was previously noted in the conversation. For I-81, 2024 had some debt programmed in it, and so the $1 billion debt plan is just being executed, and so those bonds or TIFIA loans will move forward. in the future, but that year in terms of a programmed allocation drops off of the 6-year window.
There's no real change in the plan, Mr. Merrill. It's just the timing of when those things hit.
Okay. And my second question was on the federal detail. You said that there are 2 more years of IIJA funding, but it looks like the funding is pretty consistent over these years. Is that IIJA funding being accounted for separately, or is it incorporated with these numbers here?
It is incorporated here. So what we know about the core programs to Virginia that will come through a formula basis are programmed in that top line item. And then the unique program areas that we assume will continue past 2026 are noted on this slide. We are required by lots of planning efforts to not assume that the federal funds will just dry up and stop with IIJA. And so we take a strategic, have very minimal growth in federal funding, but also assume that what Congress has approved in these core programs will continue.
So the core programs, so what she's dropping out of here are the general funded programs that were different than the core programs. So we assume those stop, we assume the others continue at a level plus a small increase. Anyone else? Thank you, Ms. Farmer. Next item on the agenda is the fiscal year 2025 6-year improvement program and agency budget, DRPT. Deanna O'Ware, welcome. Hope you're doing well.
Yes, I am, and hope you all are doing well as well. My name is Deanna Owari. I am the Chief Financial Officer for the Department of Rail and Public Transportation, and I'm here with my colleagues, Zach Trogdon, who is our Chief of Public Transportation, and Emily Stock, who is our Chief of Rail. We're going to be presenting our 6-year improvement program and our 25 budget. So the agenda for this morning, I will talk about the 6-year improvement program allocations and then turn it over to Zach, who will talk about the public transportation program. Emily will then talk about the rail program, and then I'll come back up to talk about our budget for fiscal 25 and then talk about our next steps. So just a quick overview of the timeline for our 6-year improvement program. We started this process in November with workshops. And the timeline goes in a zigzag pattern. We're currently on step 4, which is the draft, presenting the draft SIP to you all this morning. And we have 2 more steps to go where we talk about public hearings and then present the final SIP in June. So this is just a quick overview of the fiscal 22 through 25 allocations. Obviously, the draft column is highlighted at the end, but just wanted to point out a couple of things within this slide. And just to kind of reset, and for those people that may be new to the process, just wanted to explain that the SIP really is a financial representation of our grant applications that we're recommending be funded and approved. We look at revenue estimates, carry forward balances from prior years, and any funds that we can deobligate in order to pay for the projects that we're recommending. And so the draft SIP for 25 allocates $1.034 billion for public transportation and rail programs. We are recommending $392 million for our public transportation projects. And just wanted to note that it looks like there's a slight decline from 24 to 25 in public transportation. But prior to this draft, the VRE, Virginia Railway Express line was included in that public transportation line. But there was a action by the General Assembly in 2023 that separated that out. So we have a separate line for that. So it would be pretty much growing as like the other lines within public transportation. But to provide just a little more detail, and this is all in your draft 6-year improvement plan, for public transportation, we are recommending $130 million for operating assistance grants, almost $91 million for capital single and multi-year projects, $28 million for our Transit Ridership Incentive Program, or TRIP, $14.6 million for special and commuter assistance programs, and $1.4 million for paratransit assistance, and $1.2 million for our state safety oversight program. The public transportation line also includes $76.5 million in Federal Transit Administration FTA money, and nearly $13 million from Federal Highway for CMAQ and RSTP. And then we also have $33 million in toll revenue for I-395 and I-66 projects. Our rail program allocates $18 million in FY25, $9.8 million for the rail planning and freight rail programs, and $8.4 million for rail preservation program. And then obviously we have $426 million for WMATA, $16 million for VRE, and then we passed through $182 million to VPRA for the Transforming Rail in Virginia program. Okay, and these are the years 2 through 6 of our 6-year improvement program. Really, there isn't a whole lot of things that change on this line or on this slide, but I will just note in fiscal 28, there's a slight uptick in public transportation, and that really is related to some future federal highway CMAQ and RSTP projects that we have included in that year, and everything else pretty much levels off and is consistent with the revenue estimates. I also want to note that for the DRPT rail, we have a lot of the 26 funding is already allocated, and then we sort of level off as we get more projects that are more mature, and we'll develop and allocate those rail projects in those future years, so 27 through 30. And this is just a 4-year comparison of the SIP allocations. Just wanted to note here in fiscal 22 through 27, it was the first year that we introduced the Transforming Rail in Virginia program. And then beginning in fiscal 23 through 28, we began to see the revenue uptick. So that's why there is growth in those remaining years. And you see the draft plan continues to grow, with the exception of what's happening with the rail, and that's primarily related to the large decline after 2027 for the VPRA, Transforming Rail in Virginia program. So I'm going to turn it over to Zach, who will talk about our public transportation program.
Yeah. Good morning, Zach. Mr. Trogdon, welcome.
Good morning. Thank you. So I'm going to add some little bit of specifics to what Mrs. O'Ari just talked about in a higher level. So I'm also going to stay rather high level, but you'll find details in the draft 6-year improvement plan that you should have received. DRPT's draft 6-year improvement plan is a good little 40-page or so document. So you all can take a look at that for some of these project specifics. But our public transportation investments this go around, you can see what some of where our revenues come from real quickly in this slide and what we're allocating them to. Out of those, the federal grant programs, you see we do leverage a good bit of that money to accomplish our goals here. I'll give you a little pro tip. Those numbers with those federal grant programs, those are out of the Code of Federal Regulations. So it only took me at least 2 years, if not more, to figure out that that was the case when I got into my transportation career. So just giving you all a little heads up about that. So, and then you see we have numerous programs that we fund with our allocation from the Commonwealth Mass Transit Fund that I'll get into right now. So our statewide transit operating, we are recommending $128 million be allocated this year in fiscal year 25 to our transit agencies. We established this number, well, we take the allocation and we figure out our agency level allocations through our formula that includes agency financial and performance data, some, for instance, like ridership, for instance, vehicle revenues, miles traveled, things of that nature. This $128 million is down a bit from last year, which was about $133 million, a little over $133 million, so we are down a tad bit. Ms. Farmer talked about revenues are a little bit down from last year in the past. So we are a little bit down as well. You see that we do have in that last bullet we mentioned that this is something where we do cap the amount of any one agency can get at 30% of their operating budget. And sometimes we do have a delay in some of the financials because the most recently audited statements are from fiscal year 23, so there's a little bit of a lag there. But this is something to just provide, some help, but there is a limit to it. So that's our transit operating for fiscal year 25, our operating assistance program. Our other most significant program is our transit capital program, and we had about $91 million to allocate this year to our transit capital program. This here is just a summary page of our different categories of our capital program, and I'll go into the more specifics about them. But you can see, as Ms. Farmer was also mentioning and Ms. Hines was alluding to, maintenance is our focus here in the Commonwealth, and so we call it state of good repair because we help to, we want to see them replacing so that they keep their vehicles reliable, keep their equipment reliable, and it's not breaking down and not able to provide service. So that is what the bulk of our funding goes to. And then you see we have other categories which are minor enhancements and major expansions. The major expansions being ones that are $3 million, some projects that are $3 million and over, like facilities, things like that. So you see here our State of Good Repair program, and you can see that as it was designed, over 95% is basically just the replacement of revenue vehicles. Revenue vehicles being those that do provide service to passengers, not something different is called support vehicles. So this directly goes towards serving the passengers and the citizens of our communities. So this is the bulk of our program. We had hundreds of assets that we were evaluating. We were able to fund a large majority of them. I mean, we did use just about the whole $90+ million that I mentioned a second ago this year. So we got to some projects that didn't score as well as others and had that point that we couldn't move forward. So again, most of this going towards operational state of good repair vehicles. Minor enhancements, same thing. We were able to fund a large percentage of the projects, but again, they go towards things that are going to help operationally to help make sure we're moving people in our communities. So as I said on the previous slide, this is about $24 million out of the program that's going towards this. Our transit ridership incentive program, you've had us come back for a couple of actions on this to the board. It's only been around for a few years now. And when it started, it really was just that regional connectivity and zero and reduced fare programs, categories. And so since that time, as you all know, the passenger amenities, which are like passenger shelters, transit centers, transfer centers, have been added that can be funded out of this program, and as well as public safety improvements, sort of at that passenger operator nexus. The operator assaults have been going up, things of that nature. So it has been a good change for us. We've been able, at least, especially on the passenger amenity side, to transfer some of the stuff we might have had to use our capital program for over to TRIP. So that has relieved some of the pressure on some of that other funding. So it's allowed us to do more for our operators in their communities. So this just gives you an idea of sort of what type of state funding we're leveraging along with some of the local funding. So again, any specific projects you can find in your draft 6-year improvement plan, and certainly let us know if you have any questions about them. Just other sort of program highlights, in talking with some of you in some of our meetings, some of these come from something we have called our special funding program. It allows us to do some things like work with communities on funding perhaps demonstration projects, like maybe new service, maybe a new type of technology. And so a lot of most of these are going to come with a 50-50 type of funding split, so everybody's got some skin in the game in trying these things. And so that's how things are designed as well. You can see on our technical assistance is funded with this. There's a lot of studies going on about transit feasibility, micro-transit feasibility. And so it's exciting to see that our communities are using this to allow their citizens to be able to get around and have that mobility. And so, and then workforce development used to be our internship program. We've been seeing a lot of increasing interest in that, and we were asked, in some of our meetings about making sure we market that, because there is this hunger for for the workforce. So, and then our commuter assistance program is, in our urban areas, it helps find, stuff like van pool, carpool, things like that. So getting people into alternative modes of transportation out of single occupancy vehicles. So then my last slide here is about a couple of things that are funded off the top, we say, out of the Mass Transit Fund. And so one of those is VRE. They by Virginia Code, they're able to receive up to 3.5% of the Commonwealth Mass Transit Fund in order to fund their operations and capital. So they were pulled out of our other merit programs. And then WMATA also receives a portion of the Commonwealth Mass Transit Fund to help fund their operating and capital needs, 46.5% in that case. And then we also just showed a couple of other significant funding sources that come from the Commonwealth there in those last two bullets. One being to match some money that comes from the federal government. We worked with DC and Maryland to come up with $150 million to fund to match to some federal legislation. And then the WMATA dedicated capital fund that goes to the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission to help fund capital needs, obviously, in that area. So with that, I'm happy to turn it over to any questions? All right.
Any questions?
I'm happy to turn it over to Emily so that we can go to
Mr.
the rail
Secretary.
program.
Fines.
I have one question for you, Zach,
Yes.
before you leave. I was very excited about the amenities part of that program and of TRIP. And the issue that I'm most interested in, and I think has the potential to help people who need to use the bus or want to use the bus to actually be successful in using it, it has to do with bus stop shelters, other accessibility, places to wait that are not in the mud, et cetera, et cetera. I just think that is so important across the Commonwealth for the people who do need to use the bus to get around. Are we going to be tracking, like what percentage of improvement are we going to see over time on these bus stops? How many are going to get upgraded to be appropriately, have platforms, have shelters, whatever? Because it's a metric, I think, that really is important in how people use the modes we try to make available.
This was slightly before my time, but I understand that the Transit Equity and Modernization Study had a component that what's the word I'm looking for? Surveyed and found conditions and numbers of bus stops. So that's certainly something we can dust off and continue to update.
Director DeBrule.
So in the HJ 542 study, there are over 15,000 bus stops in the Commonwealth, and almost 90% of them have no accommodations whatsoever. One of the challenges that we've faced has been, I'll give you an example. Hampton Roads Transit just installed their 500th shelter last week, celebrated that. They're largely constructing those shelters on locally maintained right-of-way. Where we've had challenges in the past has been on state-maintained right-of-way, not because of VDOT, but because of the processes that are placed upon VDOT and DRPT by the Department of General Services. And so there was legislation that went through the General Assembly this session that would modify that and put that building permit authority for a period of time as a trial in the hands of the local building official. And so I'm really hopeful that that will help us move the needle, because that has been the biggest thing that has stood in our way over the past several years to getting those shelters implemented. And so being able to have access to that, track that, we have tools, technology tools that our team's developed with some consultant resources where we can use things like Google Maps to go in and assess in real time those improvements, so we can keep tracking those HJ 542 metrics over time and continue to report on how we're making progress. So I'm excited. I think we've got a lot of potential to really use this TRIP funding to make a dent in it. I'm hoping that legislation, which had a governor's amendment on it that would extend that horizon a little bit longer, we'll see what happens with that tomorrow, but we're also looking at doing another mid-cycle solicitation for the TRIP program to put more of that funding. I think everybody was waiting to see what was going to happen with that legislation, which was going on while our grant cycle was going on. And so assuming that that's going to be positive tomorrow, we're prepared to open up another solicitation to be able to move the needle even further.
That's terrific. And again, it would be nice to see that in a report, a quarterly report or something, how much progress has been made.
Holman.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Zach, during our Zoom meeting that Mr. Stant was included in, I mentioned that we had an opportunity to go down and visit with our local transit authority, and I was shocked at their income stream. Only 6 to 7% of their income is generated through ticket purchases,
Fair is correct.
which tells me it translates to ridership. And that's on buses that are cost less than $1 million. Electric vehicles are $2 million. So as a business person, I wouldn't be in business very long. And I know it's got to be funded, there's no question. And you had a slide that showed ridership, but is there anything, if I'm not, and I don't want the job, but if I were making decisions, I think I would downsize from 66 passenger buses when ridership was so abysmal to a van or pay for an Uber rather than having a 66 passenger bus with 3 clients on the bus riding around. I don't know, is there anything to help incentivize the localities to run more like a business rather than, depend on 6% of your total revenue to be on ticket purchases while you're spending more money in operations and expanding facilities and cost of buses and all of the rest? I don't know if you
Right.
have any comments about that, but.
Well, we require these agencies to do strategic plans as well, and so we look at that, and they're all looking at various ways of maybe providing service different from fixed route as well, microtransit being one of those. So, generally, if you can find an area that doesn't get good ridership from a fixed route, maybe it is a candidate for microtransit that doesn't need to come every 30 minutes or an hour. So it's something that's emerging, and we're working on that with them. So, I was telling you at that time also that our operating formula does help to, provide incentive for operating efficiently. That is built into it. So we hope that's a built-in incentive, as you say, to help incentivize that they need to figure out ways to cut costs if they're not getting the ridership and the performance that they need out of that. So it is performance-based, some of those metrics being the big part of it. So that is built into the program. But the other ways is just, working with them to figure out, new ways of doing things, not just the old way to potentially cut costs. So, it's something we certainly are engaged with them about. So I certainly look forward to talking to you about that more as we move along. So.
Just wanted to add, it's hard for these transit agencies to turn on a dime. Those large buses, those 40-foot buses, have a 12 to 14-year useful life. They are a large investment. I can give you an example. Several years ago, we worked with the city of Petersburg, very similar situation to what you described. They had they had issues with state of good repair with those larger vehicles. We helped get them, as those vehicles were all aging out about the same time, we got them into smaller, more appropriately sized vehicles that had a shorter useful life. We're now going back and replacing those vehicles with bigger vehicles again because their ridership has gone up considerably. And so I think that's the piece, particularly with the vehicles, that I think gets forgotten, is these are investments in assets that have a long shelf life. And so you kind of have to work through a replacement cycle to shift out the vehicle type and to size them. But that is, as Zach said, it's absolutely a critical part of our strategic planning process, and is really, our operating formula is driven by performance, and that was at the direction of the General Assembly back in 2018. And so we incentivize them making good business decisions. But at the end of the day, like you said, we have people that rely on these services to get where they need to go, and it's not the same as running a business. It's more like a public utility. And so it's trying to find a balance to do that as efficiently and effectively as possible. And I think the policies of this board and the policies of the General Assembly over the past several years have certainly helped incentivize that.
Mr. Coleman, there's lots of work to be done. I mean, the whole industry struggles with this issue. I laugh about the wraps that are on buses and on the various transit facilities. I said they put those on there so you can't see how many people are inside. But there's obviously a disconnect that needs to get rationalized here, figured out. And to Director DeBrule's point, you know, demand's up and down, or has been. It's pretty back to where it was in many places in terms of bus ridership. I think the WMATA bus ridership is back where it was.
It is pretty much at pre-pandemic statewide. Our levels, if you take out Metro and VRE, are at pre-pandemic levels.
So if you had policies that really drilled down into the director's point and into performance metrics, and you saw that, you know, this route or this system or this whatever had an average of 5 people on a 60 passenger bus or whatever it was, you'd continue to ask hard questions. And whether your fare revenue is 6% or 60% or 100%, I don't think it matters. It's still the right question to ask. You know, it does take time to adjust, but there are policies and things that we can do at this level to continue to incent folks to make those good business-like decisions. Because I don't care who you are, the decisions need to be business-like, meaning they should be efficient and effective. All right, Mr. Trogdon, thank you very much. Ms. Stock? It's still morning. Well, it's not. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon,
Welcome.
Mr. Secretary
How
and
are
members
you?
of the board. I'm
Hope you're
doing
well.
just fine. Thank you. So I'll be talking about our rail investment plan. There are 3 broad categories that I'm going to touch on today as I go through the rail items from the 6-year improvement program. Our rail programs represent the bulk of the funding that I'll be talking about. We also have statewide rail planning that is still housed within the Department of Rail and Public Transportation. Our department takes care of the statewide rail plan, and we also have gotten very involved in assisting localities with technical assistance on federal grants, including the Rail Crossing Elimination Program. So that is part of the funding that we'll be talking about today. And I'll talk about the applications that have come in for our rail programs, both rail preservation grants and our freight program, and for FY25. And then I'll also take a look forward at the FY25 and 26 overall funding picture. So this is our rail program recommendation summary. It represents the state portion of the applications that we've gotten for FY25 through our freight program and rail preservation program. And we are recommending 11 projects be funded through these programs for FY25. And the applications that we get do go through a scoring process and a benefit cost analysis in the case of the freight program. And I'll talk a little bit about the specific projects in the next slide. But you'll see that we do get more applications in than we are able to approve, and that's partially because of our prioritization process, but also because of the funding limitations that we have. So for rail preservation projects, rail preservation, I'll remind you, is our short line program, and it's a state of good repair program that helps our short lines, which provide valuable last mile connections to businesses throughout the Commonwealth, and that have smaller volumes that might not attract the attention of a Class 1 railroad like Norfolk Southern or CSX. And we have these projects throughout the state. They fall in some general categories, but generally we're talking about surfacing improvements, state of good repair improvements around crossings and also bridges. And so we have those from the Winchester and Western Railroad, also Buckingham Branch Railroad. That's a linear project going from Henrico County to Allegheny County. We have some improvements around the crossings at Chesapeake and Albemarle, and also the Commonwealth Railway. And then some bridge projects in the Shenandoah Valley and around the port for the Norfolk-Portsmouth Beltline. The freight program is for larger capital-intensive projects that are meant to improve the multimodal network. So these are infrastructure projects for the most part, and those are also spread throughout the state. We have the short line railroads are eligible to apply for this program as well as the preservation program if they have larger capital-intensive projects. So the Norfolk-Portsmouth Beltline has improvements at its South Street Yard that it's applied for in Portsmouth. Winchester and Western Clearbrook Siding in Frederick County. That's a siding project that builds on a transload facility that was approved through this program last year. We also have some intermodal projects in the Hampton Roads area, including one that came through from a private industry, International Feed Agricultural Capacity Enhancement, and that's one that the port has been very interested in because agricultural products represent a growth market for the Port of Virginia. And then one that's a little unique for this year, the Buckingham Branch Railroad has applied for rolling stock, new rolling stock for open-top hopper cars that they'll be running between Albemarle County and Richmond for decorative stone products. So Deanna Owari did allude to this a little bit in her presentation. This is our fiscal year 2026 look ahead. Combined, our programs generally, we generally budget for about $16 million per year for our programs, give or take, depending on how much money is left over from the year before. And our rail projects are generally multi-year projects. So what I talked about before were the applications that were coming in for FY25. On the 6-year improvement program, we have anticipated what spending is going to be happening year over year for those recommended projects, the ones that we've recommended in prior years and for FY25. So what I want to point out in this slide is that for FY26, looking ahead, we have so many qualified projects that we've recommended from previous years. Those projects are expected to nearly deplete the available revenues that we expect for FY26 in advance of next year's grant application cycle. So we're not in a position to approve more allocations for FY26. As Deanna's slide showed, we do have available funding for FY27 and going forward, but I wanted to give the board an opportunity to see what our picture looks like for FY26 for the rail programs. And that's my last slide. If anybody has questions, I'm happy to address those.
Questions?
Secretary.
Yes, Mr. Merrill.
Thank you, Ms. Stock. In terms of the 26, then does that imply that we're allocating the 26 funds based upon 25 applicants that were not funded?
No, those are, it's multi-year projects, so it's FY25 projects that are new to the system, but it's also multi-year projects and have been approved in previous years.
So, Mr. Merrill, it is assuming the projects that are recommended are funded and they're funded out over the 6-year program, and those from this year and from previous years deplete the funding that's available for next year. So it's already programmed.
Anybody else? Yes, Mr. Laird.
Mr. Secretary, Ms. Stock, could we see a 5-year summary of what we've provided to each of these short lines from a dollar standpoint?
I can put that together for you.
We'll bring that back. No problem. Anyone else?
Mr. Secretary.
Yes, Dr. Smoot.
Is this an appropriate time to return to the question about those 4 passenger rail projects? When will it be?
After lunch. No,
I'll
I'm serious.
see you then.
I'm teasing. I'm
I-
teasing.
Do you
Director
want-
DeBrule, sorry.
I'll say, Ms. Stock is just addressing the 7% of the Commonwealth Rail Fund that remains with DRPT. Ms. Awari, in her initial slides, covered the amount of funding that comes through DRPT to VPRA for the purpose of
Okay, well,
transforming
here's
rail.
what I'm searching for. We're going to
Okay.
be asked to vote on a 6-year improvement plan at the next meeting. I want to assure, and you can just tell me later where it is, if it is, where these 4 projects are specifically referenced and the funding for them in the 6-year improvement plan.
So, Dr. Smoot, they are not specifically referenced in our 6-year improvement program. The transfer of funding to VPRA is referenced in our 6-year improvement program and in the Commonwealth Transportation Fund budget. The funding is programmed by VPRA as part of their budget, and you approved their capital plan last month.
And are these 4 projects specifically referenced in that plan that we dealt with last month?
Yes, sir.
That would be fine, thank you.
I'm happy to walk you
Yeah,
through that.
give me chapter and verse later, I'll go look for
We
it.
can take care of it.
Bring it back. Thank you. All right, Ms. Awari. Thank you so much.
Yes.
You're wrapping up.
Yes, I'm going to wrap it up really quickly. So
No rush.
whereas the SIP allocations are based on our revenue estimates, our budget is really a cash flow projection of what we anticipate spending over the next fiscal year. And so we're proposing to spend $1.15 billion in money from the state, federal, and local resources to support our public transportation and rail projects. And so just really quickly, we're investing $924.1 million in transit projects. That's about an $88 million increase over last fiscal year, largely driven by capital projects. We're anticipating additional easing up of supply chain constraints that spanned from COVID, resulting in fewer bus and vehicle purchases, and we're also anticipating that we'll have more of those purchases in fiscal '25, along with additional facility construction projects. We're also planning on spending $42.5 million in DRP rail programs in fiscal '25 and $19.8 million in our administrative costs. And then, as we talked about a little bit earlier, we do pass through 93% of the revenue from the Commonwealth Rail Fund to VPRA for their projects in fiscal '25. So just want to get a little bit more in detail on our agency operating budget, which is the $19.8 million. You'll see we start in fiscal '22, and that's just a trend. This slide is showing a trend of our admin budgets over the last 4 years. In fiscal '22, we had an $8 million additional money that we had from revenue that we returned back into our public transportation and rail programs. And so we only spent $17.5 million in fiscal '22 for our administrative budget. And then you can see there have been slight increases over the past few years. We're growing by a small amount over last fiscal year. It's less than 1% growth year over year. And we are using 3.9% of the money from the Commonwealth Mass Transit Fund, Short Line Preservation Fund, and Commonwealth Rail Fund for our administrative cost. We have been able to absorb some of our salary increases by offsetting and looking at our overall budget and programs and bringing in some of the consulting work that we had done externally. And we've brought some of those costs internally, and we have staff working on some pretty amazing projects. And one that I want to highlight in our next slide, which talks about our next steps. So we do currently have live on our open portal website a draft 2025 SIP for the public to view, and it is very interactive. It's ArcGIS based, and it's going to be real time, and it's much improved from where we have been previously. And so a lot of people put in a lot of hard work behind the scenes to make this SIP more interactive and more user-friendly, so that you can find really quickly where your district projects are funded and what you have available in the program. In April, we'll also be finalizing our project management and administrative budget, and then in May, we're going to go out and have public hearings, and then consider any feedback that we receive from those hearings and incorporate any relevant comments and feedback into our final document, which we present to you all in June. And so that is the end of the presentation. I'm opening up to questions.
Secretary?
Director DeBrule.
I just want to recognize a few key staff. First of all, Ms. Awari joined us in June of last year, just before our budget and six-year program were presented to the board for approval. It is not an understatement to say she has been through it this year, learning a new industry and building a brand-new team. And so I just want to thank her for the job that she's done over the last year. She's put a lot of time and effort into the documents that you see before you today. And so she's doing a fantastic job, along with Zach and Emily as well. She also alluded to a major IT project to make the six-year program more interactive. Ms. Mathis has sent you a link to that just in the last few minutes, so you can get in there and play with it. It's pretty exciting. That tool was developed in-house with technology resources that our team had with our staff, and I am incredibly proud of them. I'm not going to name everybody because I'll forget somebody and then somebody will be upset. But that was done under the leadership of Andrew Wright, who's our Chief of External Affairs. The other big IT project that we've undertaken this year is we have an entirely new web-based grants management system. Our previous system was, I think, about 20 years old and very, very antiquated. And so we've had a team in our office. Deanna, Zach, and Emily have been very involved in it, but that was led by Jennifer Mayton, who's our Chief Administrative Officer. That project got underway, and it was stressful at times, but we flipped the switch on that December 1st, and we are paying our partner agencies through that system now. And we accepted our grant applications, and we produced the paper document, or the PDF document. It's in your package with VDOT's six-year program using that system, and that's the first time we've been able to generate that document out of our system ever. So a lot of work done in-house, a lot of time and effort, a lot of long days, long evenings, long weekends to get it done. But I couldn't be prouder of the team, and wanted to say that as they were presenting this today.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Well done. Any questions? All right, thank you very much. Well, we're, as indicated, we're into the afternoon, and so I'm going to take a break for lunch, and I'm going to recess this meeting. We'll be back in about 30 minutes. All right, I'm going to call us out of recess. We're back in order. We're on agenda number 5, item number 5. It's the VDOT draft FY25 to 2036 year improvement program, and Ms. Kimberly Pryor is here.
Good afternoon. Thank
Good
you, Mr.
afternoon,
Secretary.
welcome. I hope you're doing well.
I am doing well. Today I'm going to present to you information on the, mostly on the highway construction portion of the FY25 to FY36 year improvement program. The total program is valued at $25.4 billion, which is a slight decrease over the final FY24 through 29 six-year program. In addition to the highway construction program, which is valued at $19.1 billion, there's about $750 million in debt service included. The program provides support to more than 4,600 projects. And I would also point out that the program also includes about $3.1 billion in funding to be provided by others. In terms of highlights of the draft program, it includes the revenue assumptions Ms. Farmer highlighted in the six-year financial plan, primarily related to the assumed economic outlook and the Department of Taxation forecast, as well as items from the proposed budget and the need for additional funds for paving in the VDOT maintenance program. Ms. Farmer also mentioned the fact that the revenue sharing program is returning to $100 million annually following the reallocation of funds in that program during the COVID period. We've also set the Innovation and Technology Transportation Program at $25 million a year, as we've done for the last several years. And the Unpaved Road Program is at $25 million annually as well. These next couple of slides just highlight the various major funding programs in the draft. For the most part, each of them tick slightly upward or remain about the same. These programs are updated annually. All of them go up just slightly, except for the Special Structures Program, which just has a slight decrease. In terms of the other programs allocated in even and odd fiscal years, again, you'll see a slight uptick in the draft program. In terms of SGR bridges, this draft program provides funding for 31 new bridges for about $300 million. That's split, of course, between VDOT and local bridges. For SGR pavements, we had about $108 million for VDOT paving and about $61 million for local paving. We've added 100 new projects valued at a total of $121 million. And again, that will address deficient pavements across the Commonwealth. In terms of safety projects, consistent with the board's safety investment strategy, we're returning to the inclusion of VDOT spot improvement projects to the program, as well as the opportunity for localities to apply for systemic improvement projects. So as you can see from the slide, we're adding a significant investment in safety, 53 projects valued at $53 million. I'm sorry, $94 million. Can't see very well today.
Total.
In our Innovation and Technology Transportation Program, we had about $55 million available to allocate to new projects. We've selected 18 for a total of almost $44 million. Revenue sharing program is those funds are allocated every other year. This year, we have selected 151 projects to receive an additional or new revenue sharing allocation. That amounts to about $211 million in the revenue sharing state match piece. TAP applications, as you all are aware, these selections have not been completed. Preliminarily, we've identified 76 projects worth about $88 million. I believe following this meeting, you'll be finalizing selections, and those will be included in the final program presented to you in June. Earlier mentioned the earmarks. We recently received a notice of additional earmarks. If you recall, we got a slate of earmarks last year this time as well. This year, we received $82.3 million for 26 projects. They're listed here on the next two slides. Once we get the formal notification from the Federal Highway Administration, we'll be adding these to the final program and allocating those dollars. Finally, we'll be conducting spring public meetings again, beginning this week and running through mid-May. I've provided the website link there for you in case you're interested in seeing the materials as they're posted. We post those materials just in advance of each of the public meetings for review. We also will be finalizing the TAP selections and including those in the final program and making any adjustments necessary based on an approved budget. And then we'll be bringing a final program to you in June. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Does anybody have any questions for Ms. Pryor? Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Next item on the agenda is agenda number 6, item number 6, smart scale budget increase. Is it Whidden or Wyden? East Eldon Street, or Wyden. I thought that was the name of the road. It's Wyden. Wyden East Eldon Street, all caps, in the Northern Virginia District. Ms. Pryor, thank you.
This slide just provides a reminder of the board's policy on smart scale budget changes, where any project that has a budget increase of smart scale funding in excess of the thresholds shown has to come to the board for approval. The Wyden East Eldon Street project was submitted by the town of Herndon in round 2 of smart scale. The original project cost was just under $44 million. It was approved for a smart scale budget of $26 million, and the request was funded with high priority program funds. The remainder of the project was funded with other leverage funding sources from the town. The original scope included widening from 2 to 4 lanes. It also included bicycle and pedestrian accommodations, intersection, turn lane, and signal improvements, replacement of a culvert with a new bridge structure, and installation of bike racks and bus shelters. The project is VDOT administered and is in the right-of-way phase currently. I will point out that the project benefits were primarily associated with land use. This is just a snapshot of the project. Again, the original cost was just under $44 million with a smart scale budget of $26 million funded through the High Priority Projects Program. It had a score of 5.69, which ranked at 20 out of 21 in the cohort for Northern Virginia. The project currently has about $17.5 million in expenditures, and the current estimate on the project is just north of $71 million. So what happened? During project development, efforts were made by the town to create a utility duct bank to underground the utilities. That concept was advanced. It was actually advertised, but it was unable to be awarded because the bids came in high, and it was there was a significant budget shortfall that couldn't be addressed. So those delays associated with designing that duct bank and advertising it unsuccessfully have exacerbated issues already in place due to inflation and updated unit prices. There's really not a whole lot of scope that can be eliminated at this point, as most of the right-of-way has been purchased already. The town, however, has committed additional funding through the regional body in VTA since the project was selected, and has also requested and is recommended to receive additional revenue sharing and RSTP as part of the draft, or as part of the final program. The current project estimate, again, is $71.2 million, and it's currently scheduled to be advertised in May. However, I will point out that following some coordination that needs to happen with Dominion to do some redesign of utilities due to elimination of the duct bank, the district is targeting a late 2026 advertisement instead of what's currently scheduled. They're just waiting to finish up that coordination with the electric company.
Secretary.
Yes, sir. Mr. Lawson.
You say town has committed additional funding. How much?
If I can get you to hold that, it's on another slide,
Oh, okay.
rather than me try to tell you from
And then
memory.
how much time has elapsed since this thing was first?
It was a round 2
We've got
project.
let's go through the next couple
Okay,
slides.
sorry.
It may-
Thank you.
She may answer some of that, then we'll come back.
Yes.
Is that okay? Okay, thank you.
So the current shortfall is $15.6 million. I will point out that while the project was originally funded with high priority project funds, it is eligible for construction district grant program funds because it was submitted by the locality. Our recommendation, or the request, is to provide an additional $4.5 million from construction district grant program funds from the Northern Virginia District. The town is proposed to receive an additional $10.8 in revenue sharing, state and local match in the draft program, as well as an additional $321,000 in RSTP in the draft program. So this slide just kind of walks you through the original application to where we are today with the proposed budget increase. Originally, the project was just under $4 million. The budget was $26 million of high priority program funds and additional almost $18 million leveraged. The score was 5.69. It ranked 20 out of 21, and the expenditures to date are $17.5 million. Currently, the budget is $71.2 million, which represents a shortfall of $15.6 million. The request is for $4.5 million in district grant funds. In addition to that, the town has requested and is projected or anticipated to receive $10.8 million in revenue sharing and $321,000 in RSTP. The project previously already had $29.5 million of leverage funding on it. The score based on this new budget would be 4.86, and it would have the same rank of 20 out of 21. Does that answer your question, Mr. Lawson? Does that help?
Hit the next slide and we'll come back.
So the recommendation is to approve the smart scale budget increase of $4.5 million in May using district grant balances from Northern Virginia. In addition, the recommendations for RSTP and revenue sharing would be approved as part of the board's action on the final FY25 to 36-year improvement program. The district grant balance entry in Northern Virginia has about $11.5 million on it now from surpluses on other projects. So there's plenty there to cover this budget increase. It would leave about $7 million remaining.
So just for clarity on slide 7, make sure we're clear here. Where it shows the proposed budget increase and it says 30.596621 DGP, isn't that really 26096621 of HPP plus 45
Yes, thank you.
of DGP?
Yes, thank you. That's a good catch. I apologize.
So what she's proposing, what she's showed us, is to take the money that's already been allocated and to increase it with some district grant funds and with some revenue sharing RSTP funds that the town is in the budget for outside of this. That's what you're proposing, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right, now, Mr. Lawson.
So, just so I understand, you, in the earlier slide, it said the town is going to pay some additional funds. Is this what we're talking about?
They've identified additional sources of funding to bring to the table to help cover the shortfall.
They didn't throw more money into it. They just took it from these other allocations that were coming their way.
Yes, but keep in mind that half of the revenue sharing is local funds. They're a local match component, yes.
So they were county funds were on the hook for some of this, if you will. Yes, Mr. Merrill.
Yeah, Ms. Pryor, you said it's, this was round 2, so would that have been 2017,
2018?
2018? And the reason why it's so long in getting going?
The town struggled for quite a long time and worked with VDOT for quite a long time on this utility duct bank issue. I will tell you that generally, when we have a project like this with a significant budget increase, there's valiant efforts undertaken at the district and at the applicant level to try to bring the project back in line with the budget and look at all opportunities to revise scope and get it back in budget. And this is truly a action of last resort when you see me here asking for a budget increase on a smart scale project, because a lot of work's been done to avoid it.
Mr. Merrill, so you'll remember that our normal cadence is it's going to be at least 4 to 5 years because we're funding years 5 and 6, right? That's where the money's coming from. So if you start in 18, right, you're not going to see some money in these projects until years 5 and 6 on that 6-year plan. And I guess the question, obviously we've been in a different kind of inflationary environment and a different kind of everything environment over the last few years. It's been very unusual. But I guess my question is, did we learn anything here? Is there something to be learned here? Do we do anything differently? Do we take anything away? And this is a one-off, but there's bunches of these, right?
Sure,
we got this big, long period. We got a town that wanted to go do something that wasn't in the original scope. They dragged it out. It got complicated. They couldn't get the numbers to work. And, so 2 years, it slid further, made it worse. And now we're back, and here we are, right?
I think you
and Mr.
characterized
Stant's dying to say something, but so you might as well just let him say it, and then we'll get back to what I was going to ask. Yeah, you.
The question I have is this a product of the estimating at the time, or?
I'm suggesting, and I don't know this to be factual, I'm suggesting based on what I've heard, that it's a combination of the length of time being extended by probably a couple years, and the vagaries of what happened during that period, that entire period from 2018 to 2024. And so the costs are up substantially. Some of that could have been avoided in theory, at least the last couple of years, because we would have moved ahead more swiftly if we hadn't sort of tried to pursue this other duck banking. That's what I'm hearing. Is that?
You're 100% correct. I think the original estimated application was probably a little bit low. It was around 2. I don't think there was quite as much review and validation as we do today.
You'll remember this, Mr. Stanton. That's a really good point, Ms. Pryor. We had a lot of first and second round projects that we didn't look at the same way. We sort of trusted the estimates of the localities. And that was probably, we needed to partner better with them, right? And so we've since done that. But so there's probably some of that in there too. But the question is, when we get into this kind of thing and a locality wants to go a different route, I'm not suggesting we do this, but some people might say, okay, do that at your own risk. And here's the number now, this is what you're going to get. And if it goes differently, then you'll get the upside or you'll get the downside, but this is all you're getting. There could be some of that. So I just hope that as we go through these, we if there's something to be learned, we learn it and adjust accordingly. That's why I asked the question. Ms. Hines.
Thanks, Mr. Secretary. I do want my colleagues to know that I've been in the loop on this for probably close to a year now as they've been trying to figure out what to do. Herndon, the town of Herndon, is the only town in the Commonwealth that has a metro station in it. And so part of what the town of Herndon has been trying to do is braid funding together to make movements by all kinds of people safer in their town and provide more capacity as that metro station came online, 2 years ago, Mr. Secretary? Is that when we opened up the line to Ashburn? So I think their hope had been, that a lot of this would be done, but they encountered many physical issues. Where they were going to put the duck bank, it was solid rock. Couldn't put a duck bank there. It took a while to figure that out. The last thing I would say is that other leverage, that's Northern Virginia Transportation Authority money. That's the region saying, this is actually a regionally significant project to make this metro station area work. And that's why I support putting this extra money in, because I actually think that that's the correct assessment of the importance of this project.
Thank you, Ms. Hines. Anybody? Yes, Ms. Sellers, and then Mr. Coleman.
And so is the RSTP funding, that's definite as well? That's already gone through that MPO process?
It's recommended for funding, and it's reflected in the draft program.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. This has all the elements that trouble me a great deal. It was lagging funds sitting on the sideline, not being put to use. The inflationary impact of that, $17 billion already been spent, probably some of it because of the delays in investigating, trying alternatives. So that money has not been put to good use that benefits the public. And now we're looking at May of 27 before they are putting this for advertisement. So all those things are troubling, and we've got to get over this hump because, according to Ms. Hines, it's a very important project for that area and for the people who transit to DC perhaps. But I guess, how many more projects are like this that are sitting around? And to the Secretary's point, lessons learned, can we apply those or maybe use this to move projects along? Ms. Hines was involved for the last couple of years, and I'm sure she's benefited the locality figuring this thing out and moving it forward to the point we're at now. But how many more projects like this do we have that could use that kind of influence from board members or others?
I will point out that this project has been around for a bit. It's got a 5-digit UPC, and we're up to 6-digit UPCs now. So this is the poster child for a legacy project. So it's been around a while. It's gone through lots of machinations and transformations. Since it became a smart-scale project and the budget issue was identified, I do think a considerable amount of time has been spent trying to get it back in budget to prevent me having to come here for a budget request. And to the extent we can, and I appreciate that, to the extent that we can get those critical decisions made quicker on projects like this, I think it benefits everybody, avoid some of that inflationary increase, and just relieve some of the churn that we're seeing on some of these older projects and existing projects, frankly.
Mr. Secretary?
Or Ms. Laws?
I'm curious, how do we factor in, because I'm assuming the 71 is the number in 3 years from now, May of 27? How do we get into that? We're just doing a plug number of assumed inflation and that kind of thing?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Commissioner?
Mr. Chairman, I'd say that the question with regard to the 27 date, we are looking at the year of expenditure and inflating that cost estimate to the year of expenditure. It is not in today's dollars. So it's reflective of the revised add date. Now, going back to Mr. Coleman's question about what are we doing to be able to address these projects that may be caught in a critical decision point. My staff, along with the chief engineer, the chief financial officer, are meeting with each one of the districts to go through these types of projects that are having maybe a critical decision that staff is trying their darndest to be able to pull these projects back into the original estimate. And we're going to find that it's not going to work in some of these cases. This is a prime example that we need to, instead of taking 6 months to try and do scope reductions in items like this, we need to face up and just simply say, I can't get there, and we need to bring it either before the board and ask for an increase, cancel the project, or do something thereof. And so those are the discussions that we're having on the program and portfolio projects that we're pulling together out of that, 4,700 projects that are in the program today. So these are those ongoing conversations. We do need to do a little bit better of a job that if staff is beating their head up against a wall for 6 months, let's truncate that to a month or two, come to a conclusion and resolution, and not have this languish out there. Now, I'm not going to suggest that this one has been around for a while. There are some other projects that are in the program that are going to feel like that. I do think that this is probably an opportunity then to come back to the board and say, are those metrics that have been put into place that Kim talked about the smart scale policy changes, are those the right reflectives, recognizing what inflation has done to some of the program? For example, if it's more than 5 million or less than 5 million, it triggers one thing. If it's more than 5 million, do we need to revisit that and probably bring this back to the board for reconsideration to be able to make this process go a little bit easier?
Anyone else? All right, Ms. Pryor, number 7. Let's do it again. Intersection improvements for US 58 and Robinson Ferry Road. It's got a higher number, though.
Yes, this is a more recent project. Again, reminder of the smart scale policy. These are the thresholds the commissioner was just mentioning. I will point out these were set in 2016, so almost 10 years ago. So, a little bit of information on the project before us: intersection improvements at Route 58 and Robinson Ferry Road. This project was submitted by Brunswick County in round 4 of smart scale. The original cost was $4.2 million, and it was funded completely with district grant funds. The original scope included converting an existing median opening to an intersection to an arc cut, which is a restricted intersection type, and extending and constructing turn lanes. The project is VDOT administered. It is in the process of closing scoping in preparation for upcoming public involvement activities. The benefits associated with this project were solely due to safety. This a snapshot of the statistics on this project. Again, the original application was for $4.26 million. It was fully funded with district grant funds. It had a score of 5.21 and ranked 13 out of 19 in the cohort. To date, we've spent about $323,000. The current estimate on the project is $5.9 million. So some design refinements were needed after selection to ensure full functionality of all the movements in the intersection and as part of the project. This significantly increased the right-of-way impacts and the need to do some additional paving. In addition, there's the old favorite, unit cost and inflation have hit this project like many other projects in the program. In the program update for FY '24 to '29, we did provide an additional 5% district grant funding as part of the long list of inflationary adjustments you'll probably remember. So that was done last year. And again, we still have an additional shortfall of $1.4 million due to the increased right-of-way and pavement issues. Due to the nature of the project, there's really not a way to reduce the scope and still achieve any safety benefits. And so we are coming to you with a recommendation for a budget increase. This walks through the various changes on the project since selected. Again, original cost was $4.2 million, had a score of 5.21. It ranked 13 out of 19. In May, based on that 5% increase, the cost estimate was just under $4.5 million. We provided an additional $227,000 in district grant funding. That changed the score to 4.94, and it dropped in rank to 15 out of 19 in the cohort. Today, I'm bringing back to you an additional budget increase for the new project cost of $5.9 million. That represents a shortfall, an additional shortfall of $1.4 million for a cumulative increase of $1.66 million. That changes the score of the project to 3.75, and it drops in rank from 17 to 19, but still within the cohort. The recommendation for action by this board is to approve this smart scale budget increase in May and fund the shortfall from the Richmond District Construction District Grant balance entry. That balance entry currently has $21.5 million, and so this can certainly be covered out of that balance entry, leaving a significant balance remaining. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yes, sir, Mr. Coleman.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Secretary. Kim, what would happen if you go back one slide? 17 of 19, wonder if it came in at 20.
I'd be coming back to you because it would have fallen out of the cohort. And so anytime that a budget change drops something out of the cohort, it would require board action.
Okay, so it's requiring a board action now. So does that affect the viability of this project at all?
No, not at all. So there's two triggers for board action. One is a scope change or modification that makes the score change and drops it out of the cohort, or a budget increase above the thresholds that were identified earlier.
Kim, slide 5. So to an earlier question, or sort of an earlier question, similar to an earlier question, the first bullet says, design refinements necessary to ensure functionality of all movements. Nice words. And does that mean the design was not adequate?
No, sir. I think sometimes when our engineers and our preliminary engineering staff get out in the field and start looking at the project and begin design, there are some additional refinements needed to what the scope was as originally submitted. And sometimes those can be accommodated within the existing contingency on the project, and sometimes they cannot.
What % design do they have to come in at?
Not sure I understand your question.
The project submitted, the confidence that we can put around the estimates is based on something. 7? 10%?
Maybe, yeah.
I mean, in essence, the design was not adequate to do what we wanted it to do, so we changed the design, right? And that's where we started. We had to make some refinements. It wasn't the right, it didn't include all the refinements necessary to ensure functionality of all the movements, so we fixed it.
Yes,
And
it
the
was
question-
definitely not a scope change. This is
I mean,
definitely
I'm hearing Director DeBrule in my ear about 30% design and numbers and timelines and all sorts of things. And, we've seen this show before. And the question is, is there a way to manage that some? But the thing that really gets me here with this one is we were here 11 months ago. There ain't a lot that's changed in the world in the last 11 months as it relates to this. And we're asking for another $1.5 million on top of the 227,000.
The increase a year ago was just inflation. It was
You
just
just
a
took it across the
5%.
board and applied inflation to all of it.
Yes, and so it would not have incorporated the impact of these design refinements that we're seeing now that we're ready to close scoping.
And I'll ask you another question, because it's substantive to the cost, right? We're up $1.5 million, $1.7 million on a 4.3 to begin with, right? So what is that, 40%?
39%.
Close enough. 0.63, 40. How do we get, I get if the world changes, right? We can't always predict the world changing, but there are some things that we can do as it relates to design or when we pull the trigger or whatever. So is there anything we've learned here? Or is there anything to be learned here?
I would offer that these smart scale projects that I bring to you for budget increases are really no different from other projects funded through other programs in the 6-year program. And the fact that I bring them to you gives them an oversized importance or concern. Across the entire smart scale program, projects perform very well compared to their estimated application, as do other projects in the program. I think my lesson learned, or my lesson would be that we don't need to overemphasize these budget increases. This is a safety project. It needs to go forward, in my opinion.
Mr. Secretary?
Awesome.
Essentially, we went from a regular traditional intersection to an arc cut. And so this thing was approved with a traditional intersection, and I've noticed a trend within VDOT to get away from those and go more towards an arc cut. Was that what factored into this?
That was the application. The request was for funding for an intersection change to an arc cut. It was just
Yeah,
a median
the original
opening
was an
before.
arc cut, Mr. Lawson.
Oh, it was always an arc cut?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So it's just a different kind of arc cut to make it a little more safe? Is that the idea?
It's just taking a little bit more right of way to make it function correctly.
Yes.
The
Mr.
right-of-way,
Davis.
thank you. The right-of-way, so there was more take required for this than originally scoped? Is
And
that, is that driving the bulk of the increase?
Full depth asphalt widening as well. Next to last bullet on page 5.
Thank you.
Kim, I hear you 100%. And yeah, we do get outsized attention. But 40% is 40%. The fact that it doesn't happen all the time is really good. But it's still 40%. It's still $1.7 million we have to go find. And it's going to come out of somebody else. And so it's still concerning. And I don't know how to, we were never going to forecast and fix what happened with supply chain and all that. We weren't going to do that. I mean, we weren't able to, we shouldn't be held liable to that. But everything else, is sort of fair game. And so somehow or another, what you'd much rather do is obviously say, put stuff like this in some sort of contingency factor that's going to, on average, take care of all these And you sort of have suggested we have, because most of them do just fine. And so perhaps this is just aberrational, and there's nothing really on this one to learn or not. Because your point's well taken. We stare at these, and we got hundreds and hundreds of others, and we don't see them in context. All right, anyone else? Yes, Mr. Commissioner.
Mr. Chairman, I'd say that what Kim has alluded to is that with 4,700 projects that are in the pipeline, and most notably Smart Scale, that it's coming in with 10% design, we're doing pretty good at identifying the high risk factors at the application stage, whether it be environmental concerns, right-of-way concerns, utility concerns, those things that are driving the costs up significantly. We do have some one-offs or a couple offs in these cases but I think when you look at Smart Scale as a whole and the validation process that has been put into place to help mitigate these coming to the board, we've done pretty well. And having a design refinement at something at 10% to where it is today in the right-of-way stage, that's about 60% design at that point, and having this as a one-off, we are doing very well on the vast majority of these projects as they come before the board. How to mitigate it? I would say that we end up taking all the design applications and process them to 30% or 40%, but that in reality would not be a wise investment of anyone's time or resources, recognizing the volume of projects that we get in. So what I am suggesting is, yes, a 40% increase is not a good one, but these do happen on a case-by-case basis, that right-of-way is going to be needed a little bit more, and it's not that it's not needed. It is, as that first bullet says, when you get into some of the design features and you accommodate movements, it looks good at 10%, but you come down to the turning radii of something or the topography of it, when you deal with it in 3 dimensions, it takes a little bit more.
I think what you're telling us is it's an outlier.
It is one of the outliers.
And you can't afford to, it wouldn't make good sense to eliminate the outliers, because it would cost you way much more money than it would be to fix the outliers.
Exactly.
And I accept that, and Kim made that point earlier when she basically said, you're staring at a microscope at a couple projects, and we've got thousands of them, and happens to be one of the ones that's an outlier. So I think that's well taken. But I do think whenever we see this, we and I know you all do this, we just got to continue to ask ourselves, how can we make this better? I mean, this has been an iterative process. We've been through lots of rounds now. We've changed a lot of stuff, right? And it's better than it was, and we will continue to make it better, and so will future boards, hopefully. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda are the director's items. Madam Director.
Mr. Secretary, my monthly update to the board is in your folder, and I think that's all I have for today.
Any questions for the director? Mr. Commissioner.
Mr. Chairman, as I indicated, the last 2 or 3 months, I've been holding back my comments for this month, so I've got a laundry list of things to be able to cover.
Meeting adjourned. I'm just teasing. We're back in.
So as part of my update to the board is agreements that have been executed on behalf of the commissioner that have been delegated responsibility from the Commonwealth Transportation Board. I do have 4 agreements that have been recently executed to make you aware of. The first is with WMATA regarding a VDOT project that is in the Northern Virginia District, Washington Boulevard Bridge rehab. This agreement is with WMATA, and the purpose of that agreement is to review VDOT's design and work zone submittals that would affect WMATA's Orange Line. This is just a regular agreement for them to do an oversight of our project that would affect their facility. Second agreement that I have is with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality. This is an umbrella agreement between the agencies to address mitigation for impacts to aquatic resources. This agreement is just an agreement between these three parties that acknowledges and improves VDOT's use of surplus mitigation credits for such use. Another agreement that I have is with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to be able to fund one full-time equivalent staff person to be able to perform expedited permit applications. This is because of the size of our program, we are funding a staff person through U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to be able to process the volume of permit applications that we submit to them. We started this back in April of 2020. This is just a renewal of that agreement. And so far, it's worked very well to be able to keep our projects on time. And then the last agreement that I have is with Arlington County, the Federal Highway Administration, the National Park Service, and the Virginia State Historic Preservation Office. This is with regard to the Crystal City to DCA, the Ronald Reagan Washington project. This is the programmatic agreement between all the parties to be able to make sure that we are dealing with the historic resources in and around that area in an appropriate manner. Also, similar to what the director has in your pamphlet, you do have the commissioner's third quarter fiscal year report in your document. We do start off, I want to highlight the fact that it is Work Zone Awareness Week, and that is our first topic in your document. What we are showing, continue to have, is that we're showing a decrease in fatalities that have occurred within our work zones, even though the number of work zones and our exposures have increased. This is a good trend. It is not by any means the trend that I'd like to see. I'd like to see 0 fatalities or injuries within our work zones. But having said that, it is Work Zone Awareness Week, and I hopefully you'll be able to join us tomorrow at Afton Mountain for the Work Zone Vigil at 4 o'clock. And if you cannot, I highly encourage you all to wear orange for the day in representation for the Work Zone Awareness Week. You can go through the rest of the document. We've had a couple of awards through our Research Council, everything from pavements to some travel time and speed and reliability papers that have been written. And then finally, a project in the Bristol District, the Corridor Q that we visited about a year and a half ago. We do have significant elk population on it, about 200 elk that live on in and around the vicinity. And we did work with the Department of Wildlife Resources to be able to erect elk crossing signs. With that being said, I have 2 more items. One is Thursday, we will start our 6-year improvement program meetings, the first one being here in the Richmond District. And we will start making our rounds through the rest of April and into, I believe, the first week of May. And then finally, Mr. Stant, you had identified that the CBBT's anniversary was yesterday, 60th anniversary. I am happy to announce that tomorrow we anticipate that the tunnel boring machine on the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel will break through the North Island headwall. So in less than 1 year of boring, we're able to we anticipate completing the first tunnel, at least in the boring activities. This will mean that we have successfully installed 1,191 rings and bored 7,941 feet in less than 1 year. So we are going to anticipate having a very small private ceremony with the design build contractor on site tomorrow morning as it breaks through. And then on that journey back, the contractor will pick up Mary, turn it around for another 1 year bore back to the South Island. And so we're very excited for tomorrow's monumental breakthrough. So 2 tunnels, 2 anniversaries coming up, and very excited.
Thank you, sir.
Mr.
Appreciate it
Chairman.
very much. Any comments or any questions for the commissioner? All right, the commissioner noted Works on Awareness Week, so tomorrow he and I and some others will be out on Afton Mountain at the VDOT Workers Memorial there to draw attention to Works on Awareness Week. The numbers are a good trend, they're just not a great result yet, right? It's hard for me to understand, particularly as you went back to previous years, how we have so many crashes and fatalities in work zones. A work zone, it's not like it's not indicated. It's not like there's not a lot of stuff. There's a lot of orange. There are a lot of people. There's yellow lights blinking. There's all sorts of things going on. So even if you're a distracted driver, or even if you're an impaired driver, or even if you're anything, it seemed to me your awareness would be noticeably heightened when you went in those kinds of situations, and yet we continue to see this. I just don't understand it. But in any case, the trend is much better. I told y'all a couple years ago, after going to Fort Monroe for a similar function, that it was pretty impactful. We met a young lady there whose father had been killed, and she was from Tennessee, I think, whose father had been killed in the work zone, and she was on one of those scholarships that's offered through this program and has been paid, her college has been paid. But, I'm sure that if she had it to do differently, she would have found a different way to pay for her college and had her dad around. So it's just, it's just incredible. And to think that our people go out there, our contractors and others, go out there expecting to be safe, right? And this happens. And so, I just ask you to continue to be vigilant, follow the rules, talk to your friends. Distracted driving is a big problem. Wear your seatbelt. I mean, these are all things we all know. This isn't a secret here. But in any case, we'll be drawing some attention to it on Wednesday. The General Assembly is back tomorrow for Reconvene Day. It has been a robust session, I would say. Robust and interesting. They have a lot of work to do, and it'll be interesting to see how that all comes to pass. And I'm hopeful that we'll find common ground as the governor's laid out, and we'll see how it goes in the next few days and weeks, and that will help us set our budget ultimately, but those things are still moving around. So we look forward to that. We look forward to that concluding up the year and trying to get a budget and a bunch of bills passed. Last thing on a personal note, yesterday my fourth grandchild was born.
Congratulations.
A bouncing baby boy of 10 pounds, 10 ounces. Dear Carrie, my dear daughter-in-law, God bless you. So that's her second boy, third child, and his name is Welford Rawls Miller. So he got an interesting name, a very strong name. So I took a little point of personal privilege to welcome him to the family. With that, I don't think there's anything else unless people have questions for me. And we'll adjourn this and turn to our action meeting. No questions or comments? All right, thank you very much. Workshop meeting is adjourned, and I'm going to begin the call to order the action meeting of the Commonwealth Transportation Board, April 16th. We're now in order. And our first item on the agenda is public comment. Is there anyone here from the public that would like to make a comment? Don't think anyone has signed up. And if no one wants to speak, then we will move to our next agenda item, which is the approval of the minutes. The minutes were distributed in advance of the meeting. Are there any comments or edits, suggestions, corrections to those minutes? Mr. Yates moves approval.
Second.
Mr. Merrill seconds. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. With any abstentions? Thank you very much. Item number 1, action on authorization for the Commissioner of Highways to enter into an agreement with the Maryland DOT relating to certain works required in the state of Maryland for the completion of the I-49 Express Lanes Northern Extension projects. Faison Habib.
Thank you, Chairman.
Afternoon, sir.
Afternoon, sir. So last month, Mega Project Director Michelle Shropshire presented a draft interstate agreement with Maryland to the board. That is related to the Project Next signage work that needs to be done in Maryland. Since then, we have finalized the provisions of the document. What you saw last month, what you have in your package today, there were no changes to the agreement, which is minor cleanup language. Therefore, the department is now recommending the board to authorize the Commissioner of Highways to execute the agreement with Maryland so we can continue with the project.
Yes, Ms. Hines.
I move approval.
Second.
Ms. Hines makes the motion, Mr. Yates second. Is there any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. Item 2, action on fiscal years 24 through 29 six-year improvement program transfers for February 20 through March 15, 2024. Ms. Pryor.
Thank you. You should have before you the monthly transfer report that reflects transfers requiring your approval as well as transfers that are just for your information. I recommend your approval.
Moved.
Hines makes the motion. Ms. Sellers seconds. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. Item number 3, action on addition of projects to the six-year improvement program for fiscal years 24 through 29. Ms. Pryor.
Thank you. I have 3 projects proposed for amendment to the existing program. They are all 3 in Stanton, and they're safety projects associated with our 2-lane rural road initiative, and I recommend your approval.
Motion? Mr. Merrill moves. Mr. Davis seconds. See how this works?
Yeah.
Is there any further comment or questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is item number 4 on bids. Mr. Coker. Sporting that, is that a Virginia Tech hoagie tie?
Yes.
I was just wondering, it started to look a little bit like a VMI tie, but I'm just saying.
I'm glad you asked about this. I just want to take the time that remind everyone this is April 16th, 17 years ago. 32 individuals from the Virginia Tech community lost their lives, so I'm wearing this tie in honor of them. But thank you for
recognizing. That's a
recognizing.
much more solemn situation, and I think we ought to take a brief moment of silence.
Sir, I'd appreciate it.
Amen.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Coker. My daddy was a Virginia Tech graduate. He went in 42 when it was all military.
Mm-hmm.
And then he got drafted after his rat year, and he went into the military for real for a few years. And when you came back, you could pick whether you went back into the Corps or whether you didn't. And guess what he picked? He said he'd done it long enough.
Oh, man.
So I think he graduated in the class of 48, but he was a proud Hokie.
A little bit before my time.
Yes, sir, it was. Mine too.
First project up is Order K58 in the Northern Virginia District. This is UPC 107937, Fairfax County Parkway widening segment 2. We received 3 bids. Low bidder was Branch Civil out of Roanoke, Virginia at $69.6 million. This was within range, and I recommend approval.
I move approval.
We have a motion, and we have a second? Ms. Sellers seconds. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Order number K60.
K60 is in the Richmond District, located in Chesterfield County. This is UPC 111466. This is a smart scale I-95 auxiliary lanes bridge rehab project. We received 1 bid from Kokosi Construction Company for $22 million. This is within range, and I recommend approval.
Motion?
Mr. Secretary, could I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Hines.
I'm surprised to see just 1 bidder, Mr. Coker. What happened?
We're seeing specifically in the Richmond District and points east, the saturation of the projects being let, especially the larger projects. There are less and less contractors that are able to perform this work, so we are seeing a reduction in bidders.
Demand is outstripping supply.
Yep. have the opposite happening as big projects are closing up in Northern Virginia. We're seeing more bidders on most of our projects, so.
You know, the good news, and I'm getting ahead of myself, but the good news is that all these are within range. And so that gives us some comfort that they're reasonable, given how we forecast and predict and set those ranges. You'll remember, we don't have any paving projects, pure paving projects in here. Those are all gone, but those are the ones we've struggled with the most recently in terms of keeping them within range, but these seem to have been not as much. So if you'll continue, sir. We're still on case 60. We had a question. Did we have a motion?
Mr. Secretary, I have a motion to approve.
Mr. Davis moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Sellers seconds. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. Order number DB 123.
This project is in the Bristol District. This is UPC 122267. Oops, too far. And town of Withville. This is at the intersection of I-81 and I-77. We're installing some acceleration, deceleration lanes. We received 3 bids. The best value was Orders Construction Company at $53.9 million, just under $54 million. This is within range, and I recommend approval.
Mr. Chairman, unlike other projects in our district, we did have 3 bidders here. And the other part of the good news is the recommended bid is within the range, and so I move approval.
The only bad news is that Orders Construction Company's in St. Albans, West Virginia. We need to get them to move to Virginia.
Well, St. Albans is not far from the state line.
You're making my point, sir.
Part of the annexation process will include St. Albans.
We gave it to them. We should be able to take it back.
I don't think you want that part of West Virginia.
I'll second Mr. Folks's motion.
Moving right along.
Second.
We have a second from Ms. Hines. Thank you for bailing me out, Ms. Hines. We have a motion and we have a second. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. Order number DB 125. Back to Ms. Hines' territory.
EB 125, this is the Northern Virginia District. This is Fairfax County Parkway widening southern segment. We received 3 bids. The low bidder, Shirley Construction Company, $101 million. This is within range. We recommend approval.
Secretary, I move approval of this project.
Thank you, Ms. Hines. We have a motion. Is there a second? Ms. Green seconds. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. Order number DB 129 in the Hampton Roads District. This is a good one.
Yes, sir. DB 129, the Hampton Roads District. This is the I-64 Gap Segment C widening in James City County and York County. We received 3 bids. The best value bidder was the Allen Myers Wagman Joint Venture at $174 million. This is within range, and I recommend approval.
Your motion, Mr. Stant? Second. Mr. Coleman seconds. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Let me say one thing about this project, because it's moving along so swiftly, the first phase of this, if you will. And so what they're doing, Commissioner's done this brilliantly, I think, is we started at the Richmond end, right? That was, I'll call that phase 1. It's segment A, B, and C, but I'm talking about what started first. Now we're going to go the most easterly piece, and that's going to be phase 2. And we've gotten really good bids on both phases. And then the people that are working on phase 1 and phase 2 are going to still be there when it's time to bid for phase 3, right? So we get everybody else, plus we got 2 folks that are, or 2 entities, if you will, that are there, that are working right next to it. And that's a really good situation for us. And so I'm hopeful and that we'll get another good bid when that happens. Commissioner, when will that go out?
Mr. Chairman, the request for qualifications is already out. We anticipate the RFP to be issued here fairly shortly, and hopefully within the next 5 to 6 months, have a bid back for the Commonwealth Transportation Board to take action on.
So we ought to have really good competition on that, and things are settling out, so I'm hopeful that we'll have a really good result.
Mr. Secretary?
Yes,
So this is a question about the money.
ma'am.
Because the money came together for this GAP project from a couple of different sources, including the last tranche that came from Smart Scale. So, and this is like $25 million less. This is pretty amazing. So what's the ripple back on this money that we're not needing? Is it going to come back into high priority? Might there be some other things we could do with it sooner than waiting for the next round?
Mr. Chairman, I think for right now, seeing that we're getting good bids, we're hoping for the next trend to be the final segment having a good bid. This is not the all-inclusive price. We still have the engineering cost associated with it, the oversight cost. Let us do the final tally, and then we'll be able to come back, because there are multiple funding sources that have put monies into this. Not only the general fund monies that came from the General Assembly, we have monies that FHWA has granted to us, as well as CVTA has brought money to the table, and then Smart Scale has brought to it. So let us take a look at that, and I would anticipate once we get the final tally on this, then we'll be able to be in a position to say what the disbursement may be, or putting monies back into the appropriate fund source.
Great.
I think it would be, we sort of had some help from HR TAC as well.
Yes.
That helped us on this project. It was indirect, but it was real. It's the same dollars. And so that has been helpful as well, but yeah, we'll get back. Thank you. Did we vote on, we didn't vote, yeah, we did vote on this. So we're on now number DB 131 in Fredericksburg District. Mr.
Sir,
Coker.
this is the Route 1 and I-95 improvements at exit 126 in Spotsylvania County. We received 3 bids. Low bidder, best value was Shirley Contracting at $34.8 million, and that is within range. I recommend approval.
Sellers. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Mr. Davis seconds. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye. All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you, Mr. Coker.
Thank you, sir.
Well done. That concludes our agenda. I believe, Ms. Mathis? Yes. If I can get back to my agenda page. Yes. That concludes our agenda, and we will be, some of the at-large members will be convening after this, if you can, to look at TAP selections, and we'll work on that to supplement in where the district members have left off. So this meeting's adjourned.